She shoved the eviction notice under Sienna's apartment door at 6 in the morning. Not slid, shoved, hard enough that the paper crumpled against the baseboard, the yellow corner visible from 3 feet away. When Sienna opened the door in her scrubs, coffee mug in hand, Maisie's cartoon still blaring from the living room. The landlord, Mrs. Pratt, 71 years old, reading glasses perpetually perched on the end of her nose like a prop she'd forgotten was there, stood in the hallway in her housecoat, without apology, without preamble, without even the decency to look Sienna in the face. 30 days, she said. I've been patient. Sienna looked at the notice, looked at her coffee, looked at Maisie's backpack hanging by the door with the broken zipper she'd been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. Mrs. Pratt, I told you. The hospital shifted my hours. My direct deposit doesn't hit until 30 days, Sienna. The woman turned and walked back down the hallway, slippers whispering against linoleum, gone before Sienna could finish the sentence. That was how the worst Tuesday of Sienna Hale's year began. It would not be the worst thing that happened to her before noon. If you have ever stood in a hallway holding a coffee that's gone cold, staring at a piece of paper that has the power to dismantle everything you've spent years holding together, this story is for you. Because Sienna Hale didn't ask for any of what came next. She was just trying to survive the morning. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and stay with us until the end, because this story goes places you will not see coming. Drop your city or country in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if something in these first few minutes already hit you somewhere real, give it a like. It helps more than you know. Now let's go back to that hospital hallway, because that's where everything changed. Sienna Hale had learned, somewhere around age 26, that exhaustion had layers. There was the surface kind, the kind you felt after a double shift, where your feet ached and your eyes burned and all you wanted was a shower and 8 hours you were never going to get. That kind was manageable. She'd made peace with that kind years ago. Then there was the deeper kind, the kind that settled into the bones, the kind that came not from working too hard, but from carrying too much for too long without anyone to help carry it. That was the kind Sienna couldn't shake anymore, no matter how much coffee she drank or how many times she told herself she was fine. She was 30 years old. She had a 6-year-old daughter named Maisie, who asked too many questions and slept with her arms flung wide like she was trying to hug the whole mattress. She had a nursing license, 12 years of student loan debt, a car with a check engine light that had been on so long she'd stopped seeing it, and an apartment she was now 30 days away from losing. She was not fine. But Maisie needed breakfast, so Sienna made eggs. Maisie needed her hair done, so Sienna braided it, twice, because the first one was crooked and Maisie told her so with the blunt honesty that only 6-year-olds possess. Maisie needed to be at school by 7:45, so Sienna drove her there in the car with the check engine light, kissed her forehead, watched her run inside without looking back, and then sat in the parking lot for 90 seconds, just breathing before she drove to the hospital. That was the routine. That was every morning. Northwestern Memorial was already running hot by the time Sienna badged in at 8:10. The ER on a Tuesday morning in November had its own specific misery. The overnight cases still waiting on beds, the new arrivals already stacking up, the charge nurse doing the math on staff coverage with the particular tight-jawed expression that meant someone had called in sick and nobody was happy about it. Hale. That was Dominique, charge nurse, 6 feet of organized authority. We're short. I need you on triage. I'm always on triage. And you're always good at it. Quit complaining. Sienna dropped her bag at her locker, tied her hair back, and went to work. The next 4 hours were the blur they always were. A construction worker with a laceration across his palm. A woman in her 60s with chest tightness that turned out to be anxiety, but had to be treated like it wasn't until proven otherwise. A teenager with a sprained ankle who was more upset about missing basketball practice than about the ankle itself. An elderly man who came in alone and kept asking for someone named Margaret, quietly, almost to himself, like he wasn't sure she'd hear him, but couldn't stop trying. Sienna got the elderly man a warm blanket and sat with him for 4 minutes she didn't have. Margaret, it turned out, was his wife. She'd died 11 months ago. I keep forgetting, he said. He said not to Sienna exactly, more to the middle distance. Every morning I forget and then I remember again. Sienna pressed her hand over his for a moment. Said nothing. There was nothing to say. She was walking back toward triage when she almost collided with the man coming around the corner. Not quite a collision. Her shoulder clipped his arm. His very expensive arm, as it turned out, encased in a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than her rent. She stepped back, automatic apology already forming on her lips, and then she looked up. And the apology died somewhere in her throat. She recognized him the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years. Not immediately, not all at once, but in pieces. The jaw first, then the line of his mouth, then the eyes, dark and careful, and entirely still in the way that some people's eyes go still when they're working very hard not to react to something. Declan Voss. 8 years older, 4 inches broader across the shoulders, hair shorter than she remembered, jaw harder. Dressed like someone who had never once worried about rent in his life. Which was strange, because the last time she'd seen him, he'd been 22 and splitting the cost of a tank of gas with her because neither of them had enough alone. He was not alone now. 2 men stood behind him at a distance that was precisely calibrated, close enough to respond, far enough to give the appearance of privacy. They wore dark coats and the specific kind of stillness that didn't come from being relaxed. They were watching the hallway. They were watching her. Declan was watching her too. "Sienna," he said. One word. Her name. In his voice, lower than she remembered, rougher around the edges. And it landed exactly the way she did not want it to land, like something she'd been holding her breath against for 7 years had finally arrived. "You've got to be kidding me," she said. It was not the most articulate response. She was aware of that. "I'm not." He didn't smile. He looked like a man bracing for impact and refusing to flinch from it. "I know this is... I know. What are you doing here?" "My uncle. He had heart surgery. He's upstairs in cardiac recovery." Sienna's brain was doing 2 things at once. The professional part cataloging the situation, noting the cardiac recovery floor, connecting it to the patient transfer she'd heard about that morning. An older man, VIP admission, private room. And the rest of her, the part that had nothing to do with nursing, was doing something she absolutely refused to call what it actually was. "I heard there was an admission," she said. "I didn't know it was..." She stopped, reorganized. "I hope he's doing well." "He's stable." "Good." She started to step around him. "I have patience." "Sienna." She stopped, did not turn around. The back of her neck felt like it was waiting for something. "I'd like to buy you dinner," he said, "if you're willing to hear me out." She turned then, because she needed him to see her face when she said this. She needed it to be clear. "You disappeared," she said, 7 years ago. No call, no text, no note. You were just gone. And you want to buy me dinner." "I want to explain." "I don't need an explanation. I needed one 7 years ago." She held his gaze. "I'm okay, Declan. I built a life. I don't need you to explain anything." He took that. Absorbed it without arguing, without the defensive posture she'd half expected, without any of the deflections she'd spent years imagining he might use if this conversation ever happened. He just stood there and took it. "I know you don't need anything from me," he said. "I'm not asking because you need it. I'm asking because I owe you the truth, and because I've wanted to give it to you for 7 years, and I've never had the chance." A pause. "One dinner. You can tell me to go to hell over dessert if you want. I'll accept that." Sienna looked at him for a long moment, looked at the 2 men standing at distance behind him, who were now studying the wall with focused intensity. "Who are those men?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression, not quite guilt, something more complicated than guilt. "Security," he said. "Security," she repeated. "It's a long explanation." "I'll bet it is." She walked away. She made it 12 steps before her pager went off. Bay 4, probable fracture. And she was running before she'd fully processed the fact that her hands were not entirely steady. Declan Voss. Inner hospital. With bodyguards. She'd spent a year after he left convinced something terrible had happened to him. Another year angry. Another year trying to stop being angry. And then she'd found out she was pregnant, alone, 23, terrified. And she'd stopped having the luxury of thinking about Declan Voss at all. Maisie was 6 now. Declan didn't know she existed. Sienna set her jaw, pushed through the curtain to Bay 4, and went back to work. She did not eat lunch. She ate a granola bar at the nurse's station at 1:15 while updating charts. Dominique watched her with the particular expression that meant she'd noticed something was wrong and was deciding whether to ask about it. "You look like you saw a ghost," Dominique said. "I'm fine." "You've said that 4 times today, and you mean it less each time." Sienna put the granola bar down, picked it back up. "Someone from a long time ago. It's nothing." "Someone from a long time ago doesn't make your hands shake while you're charting." "My hands aren't shaking." Dominique looked pointedly at the pen Sienna had been clicking for the past 3 minutes without noticing. Sienna set the pen down. "Old boyfriend," she said. "We were together in college. He disappeared. He's back." She picked the pen up again. "It's nothing." Dominique had the kind of voice that could fit a great deal of skepticism into 2 syllables. "Don't." "I haven't said anything." "You're about to." "I was going to say that Dr. Reinhold is looking for you about the shift schedule for December." Dominique paused. "But also, if you made your hands shake just from seeing him, maybe that's worth paying attention to." Sienna did not respond to that. She finished the chart, clocked it, and went back to triage. I was still there. Not hovering. Nothing that aggressive. He was seated in the waiting area near the cardiac wing elevator bank, jacket folded over his knee, phone in hand, looking like a man who was prepared to wait as long as necessary and had decided not to make it anyone's problem. The 2 security men had arranged themselves at a comfortable radius. One of them was drinking coffee. The other was reading something. Sienna noticed all of this in the 3 seconds she allowed herself to look before looking away. He didn't try to approach her. He didn't flag her down. He sat there until 4 o'clock, when visiting hours to the cardiac floor ended, and he disappeared upstairs, and she didn't see him again until she was pulling her coat on at the end of her shift. He was waiting by the elevator. Alone this time. "The security team goes home at 5, he said, by way of explanation. "This is actually safer for you." "You think that sentence is less alarming than the sentence before it?" "No. I think you're smart enough to know it probably should be alarming, and I'm trying to be honest with you instead of pretending it isn't." Sienna looked at him. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. After a half-second's hesitation, he stepped in too. "Saturday," she said. The doors closed. "I get off at 3. I have to pick up my daughter by 5:30. She watched his face when she said it, the word daughter, the slight recalibration, surprise maybe, or something she couldn't entirely name. He didn't ask. He absorbed it the same way he'd absorbed everything else she'd said today, without pushing back. "Wherever you want," he said. "You choose the place." "I'm going to bring my own car." "Of course." "And if at any point I want to leave, you leave." No hesitation. No argument, no negotiation. You leave. The elevator reached the ground floor. Sienna stepped out first. Didn't look back until she was through the lobby doors. And when she did, he was still standing in the elevator, watching the doors close between them, not moving, like a man who understood he didn't have the right to follow. She sat in her car for a long time before she started the engine. She thought about the eviction notice folded in her coat pocket. She thought about the broken zipper on Maisie's backpack. She thought about the elderly man with no Margaret anymore, forgetting and remembering every morning. She thought about what it meant that her first instinct when she'd seen Declan Voss in that hallway had been something closer to relief than fury. That frightened her more than anything else. She started the engine, pulled out of the parking structure, turned on the radio so she wouldn't have to think, and thought anyway the entire drive to Maisie's school. Maisie came running out the front doors with her coat half on and both shoes untied, which was how she always came out. Like containment was a concept that applied to other children. She yanked open the passenger door and climbed in with the particular energy of a person who had been indoors for 7 hours and had serious opinions about it. "We did multiplication today," Maisie announced. "How'd you do?" "Good, mostly. Miss Lerner said I rush." A pause. "I do rush." "A little." "A lot." Maisie buckled her seatbelt with enormous concentration. "Mom." "Yeah." "You look weird." Sienna checked the rear-view mirror, checked the road. "I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because it's always true." Maisie considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Grandma says "I'm fine" means the opposite of fine. Grandma talks too much. She says that too. Sienna laughed. It was real. the kind that snuck up on her, and it loosened something in her chest she hadn't realized was tight. She reached back and squeezed Maisie's knee. "I had a weird day," she said. "I'm okay. Tell me about multiplication." Maisie told her about multiplication for 22 minutes without stopping. By the time they got home, Sienna had almost stopped thinking about Declan Voss. Almost. She put Maisie to bed at 8:30, sat at the kitchen table with the eviction notice and a yellow legal pad, doing the math on her finances the way she did every few months when reality required her full attention. The numbers were not good. They were not catastrophic, not yet, but they were the kind of not good that required intervention, not patience. She could call her mother. Her mother would help and would never once let her forget it. She could pick up an extra shift. She was already running close to her limit, but the overtime would help. She stopped herself before she finished that thought. Whatever solution she found, it would not involve Declan Voss. He didn't get to walk back into her life as a rescue. That wasn't how this worked. She folded the eviction notice, put it in the drawer where she kept the things she needed to deal with but couldn't deal with yet, turned off the kitchen light. In Maisie's doorway, she paused. Her daughter was sprawled across the mattress with one arm dangling off the edge, dark hair fanned out, mouth slightly open. The nightlight threw a pale orange glow across the room. Maisie had Sienna's nose. She had Declan's eyes, dark, direct, entirely unself-conscious. Sienna had spent 6 years telling herself it was a coincidence. She'd spent 6 years being wrong. She pulled the door mostly closed, walked to her own room, lay down without changing out of her clothes, and stared at the ceiling. Saturday, she'd said. She'd said Saturday. She didn't know what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing. Both of those things were equally true, and she was too tired to resolve the contradiction tonight. Outside, Chicago November pressed against the windows. Somewhere down the street, a car alarm went off, and nobody responded to it. The heat in her radiator knocked twice, its particular protest against November, and went quiet. Sienna closed her eyes, thought about a 22-year-old boy who had kissed her forehead every morning before class, and told her once, very quietly, like he was embarrassed by how much he meant it, that she was the only person who made ordinary life feel like something worth having. Wondered what had happened to him. Wondered if whatever was standing in his place was something she could afford to find out. Saturday arrived the way bad decisions usually do, quietly, without enough warning to reconsider. Sienna had spent the week telling herself the dinner was a formality, a closing of accounts. She would sit across from Declan Voss, listen to whatever explanation he'd been carrying around for 7 years, say something measured and adult, and drive home. That would be the end of it. Clean. Contained. She changed her outfit 3 times. The third one was a dark green sweater she'd owned for 4 years, worn at the left cuff, nothing special. And she chose it specifically because it required no explanation. She was not dressing for him. She was dressing like a woman who had 30 minutes between picking up Maisie from her mother's and driving across town, which was exactly what she was. Her mother, Patricia Hale, had opinions about the whole situation. Patricia had opinions about most situations, which she delivered with the particular efficiency of a woman who had decided that subtlety was for people with more time. "You said his name like you were defusing a bomb," Patricia said, when Sienna dropped Maisie off at 5. "I said his name like it was a name. Declan Voss." Patricia tested it in her mouth, frowned. "He's the one who vanished." "He didn't vanish. He left." Without a word. "Mom, I'm just establishing the facts." Patricia looked at Maisie, who was already inside and raiding the cookie tin with focused dedication. "Does he know?" Sienna pulled her keys from her pocket. Put them back. "No." "Are you going to tell him?" "I don't know what tonight is yet. Can we not?" "I'm not pressuring you." Patricia touched her daughter's arm. "Brief, real. I just want you to know what you're walking into before you walk into it." "I know what I'm walking into." "You know what it was 7 years ago. You have no idea what it is now." Sienna looked at her mother for a moment. Patricia had the face of a woman who had weathered things. Not gracefully, not without damage, but completely. She didn't give advice to fill silence. She gave it because she meant it. "I'll be back by 9, Sienna said. "Take your time." Patricia paused. But not too much time. The restaurant Sienna chose was an Italian place in Lincoln Park. Not expensive enough to feel like a statement, not casual enough to feel like she was minimizing the conversation. Neutral ground. She'd been there twice, knew the layout, knew the exits. She hadn't been aware she was thinking in terms of exits until she was already in the parking lot. Declan was already inside when she arrived. No bodyguards. She'd half expected them anyway, standing outside, parked across the street, somewhere obvious. But there was just him, seated at a corner table with his back to the wall, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearm, studying the menu with the focused attention of someone who had arrived early enough to compose himself and was still working on it. He stood when he saw her. Not a performance of manners, just reflex, automatic, the way it had always been with him. She'd forgotten that about him. The specific way he occupied space around her, always slightly oriented in her direction without making it obvious. "You came," he said. "I said I would." "I know. I wasn't sure that meant anything." She sat down. He sat down. The waiter materialized, offered water, disappeared. They were alone in this way that two people with 7 years between them are always alone, regardless of how many other people are in the room. "Start talking," she said. Declan set down the menu. Folded his hands on the table, she noticed the knuckles, slightly enlarged on the right hand, the kind of old damage that tells a particular kind of story, and looked at her directly. "My father owed money to the Carrera organization," he said. "Not loan shark money, not gambling debt. The kind of money that comes from a decade of bad decisions and worse partners and one catastrophic deal that went sideways 2 months before I graduated. By the time I found out how bad it was, he'd already been told that the debt transferred to the family if he couldn't pay it." Sienna said nothing. Her water glass was cold in her hand. "The week after graduation," Declan continued, "2 men came to the apartment my father was renting. Not to threaten him, just to make him understand what the timeline looked like." He paused. "They drove past my mother's house on their way out, just drove past it, to make a different point. They were threatening your family. They were informing my family. There's a specific kind of threat that doesn't sound like a threat. This was that." She'd known none of this. In the years since he'd left, she'd constructed various versions of why. He'd gotten scared, he'd gotten restless, he'd found someone else. He'd simply decided she wasn't worth staying for. She'd never constructed this version because she hadn't known this version was possible. "So you what?" she asked. "You took over? You became... What are you exactly? What do I call what you are? Complicated. That's not a job title." "No." He met her eyes. "The Carrera organization had a leadership problem. My father's debt was one of several things being restructured. I was 22, I was angry, and I had a particular kind of intelligence that certain people found useful. I made an arrangement. The debt was absorbed in exchange for involvement. You joined the mob." He didn't flinch from the word. "Essentially. And you left without telling me because they specifically required it. As a condition of the arrangement, no personal connections that could be leveraged, no relationships that could become pressure points. They were very clear about what happened to people who ignored that condition." He looked at the table for a moment, then back up. "You would have been a pressure point, Sienna. That was the word they used. I hated that word for about 6 years." Sienna put her water glass down. The ice shifted. "You made a decision about my life without asking me," she said. "Yes." "You decided I needed to be protected without giving me any choice in whether I wanted that protection." "Yes." "And you're telling me this like it was the noble thing to do." "No." His voice was flat and certain. "I'm telling you this because you asked for the truth, and that is the truth. I'm not asking you to think it was noble. It wasn't. It was a 22-year-old making an impossible choice badly, and the person who paid for it the most was you, and I know that." The waiter came back. They ordered. Sienna couldn't have said what she ordered 30 seconds after she'd said it. The waiter left again. "You said you've been searching for a way out," she said, "for 4 years, actively." "What does that mean, actively?" "It means lawyers, accountants, people who specialize in untangling structures that were designed never to be untangled. It means I've been transferring legitimate business assets into clean ownership quietly enough that it doesn't look like evacuation. Because if it looks like evacuation, people get nervous. And when those people get nervous, the people around them get hurt." A pause. It means I've made about 11 enemies in the last 4 years who were previously neutral. And the men who were with you at the hospital. 2 of them have been with me for 3 years. They're aware of what I'm trying to do. They're also aware that certain people would prefer I didn't succeed at it. Sienna looked at him across the table. He was the same person. She could still find him inside the man sitting in front of her, the 22-year-old who had laughed too loudly at his own jokes and burned every piece of toast he ever made and read 3 books simultaneously because he couldn't commit to just one. But he was also someone she had never met, built from years she hadn't been part of, shaped by decisions she hadn't been consulted on. "Are you in danger right now?" she asked. "Tonight, sitting here." He considered whether to lie. She could see him consider it. "Moderate," he said. "Not immediate." "Moderate danger." She repeated this. "You brought moderate danger into a Lincoln Park Italian restaurant." "I chose a corner table." "Oh, great, that fixes it." Something happened in his expression. The ghost of the laugh she remembered, the one that started in his eyes before it reached his mouth. He pressed it back down almost immediately, but she'd seen it, and that was somehow worse than if it hadn't appeared at all. "I'm not asking you for anything," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to pull you back into my life or to make promises about things I can't deliver yet. I'm here because you deserved an explanation 7 years ago, and I couldn't give it to you, and I'm giving it now. That's all." "And the dinner?" "I wanted to see you. Simple. Undecorated. I've wanted to see you for 7 years, and you were 15 feet away in a hospital hallway, and I couldn't make myself walk past you without trying." The food arrived. They ate. The conversation moved. Not away from the hard things, but around them, the way conversation does when 2 people who once knew each other completely have to figure out what they know now. He asked about her work, specifically and carefully, not with the glazed politeness of someone asking to fill silence, but with the focused attention of someone who actually wanted the answer. She told him about the elderly man who kept forgetting his wife was gone. She didn't know why she told him that particular thing. "That's the part that gets you," Declan said. "Not the emergencies. The grief. It sneaks up on you during emergencies. You think you're in task mode, and then somebody says something and you feel it sideways." "Yeah." He was looking at his plate. "I know that feeling." She almost asked him what he grieved, stopped herself. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He did not ask about Maisie beyond the single question he asked when the subject came up naturally, how old, and her name, and he did not push for more. He absorbed the information and moved with care around it, like a person navigating a room in the dark, trying not to knock anything over. She drove home with the windows down despite the November cold. She didn't go inside immediately. She sat in the parking space behind her building and pressed her hands flat against her thighs and made herself breathe evenly until her chest stopped feeling like it had been rearranged. She was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble she could evict notice her way through. Not the kind she could extra shift her way past. The kind that lived specifically in the gap between knowing exactly what was dangerous and doing it anyway. She went inside. She did not text him. She did not think about whether he would text her. He texted her at 11:17. It said, "Thank you for coming. I mean that." She looked at the message for 4 minutes. Then she put her phone face down on the nightstand, turned off the light, and lay in the dark. She texted back, "I heard you. That's all I can say right now." His response came quickly. "That's enough." She slept better than she had in weeks, which she refused to analyze. The second time she saw him was not planned. It was Wednesday, her short day, finished by 2, and she was at the pharmacy 2 blocks from the hospital, waiting for Maisie's prescription to be filled, reading the instructions on a cough medicine bottle with the particular intensity of a person who is trying not to think about something when he walked in. This time alone. No security, no coat, just a dark sweater, jeans, a slight tension around his jaw that suggested he'd come from somewhere difficult. He saw her immediately. The pharmacy was not large. "I'm not following you," he said before anything else. "I know, my pharmacy is 2 blocks from the hospital. Yours is apparently also 2 blocks from the hospital. My uncle's prescriptions." He held up the paper bag in his hand. "He's particular about which pharmacy." "How's he doing?" "Better, stubborn, complaining about the food, which apparently means he's recovered." A pause. "How are you?" "Fine." "You and that word." She looked at him. He looked at her. The pharmacist called a number and someone across the store moved to collect it. I've been thinking about what you said Saturday, she said, about the exit plan. Okay. How real is it? Not the version you tell yourself to sleep at night, the actual version. He was quiet for a moment, which she'd learned over the years was his tell. Not evasion, but a refusal to answer until he was sure he was answering honestly. 60%, he said, maybe 65. There are variables I can't control. There are people who will not accept a clean exit regardless of what I offer them. And there's a specific man, I won't say his name here, who has made it very clear that my continued cooperation is not optional. And if he decides to stop being cooperative about your exit, then the percentage drops considerably. She laughed. It came out short and humorless, the kind that isn't actually laughter, but is the only available response to something too absurd to process straight. Declan, you're describing your own life like it's a business problem. It is a business problem. It's also the most frightening thing I've ever tried to do, and I've done things that were considerably frightening. His voice was even, but she could hear what lived underneath it. Not fear exactly, but the exhaustion of someone who has been afraid for so long they've stopped experiencing it as fear and started experiencing it as weather. I'm not asking you to wait for me. I'm not asking you to believe in this. I'm asking you to... He stopped. What? I don't know, he said. That's honest. I don't know what I'm asking you for. I just know that every time I've made a plan in the last 4 years, the thing I was working toward was something that looked like a conversation I could have with you without having to apologize for what I am. Her number was called. She walked to the counter, collected Maisie's prescription, signed the form. When she turned around, he was still standing where she'd left him, not hovering, not expecting, just waiting to see if she would leave without saying anything. Coffee, she said. Thursday. There's a place on Michigan that I go before my shift, 7:30. I'll be there. With or without the security men? That's not... He stopped. I'll work it out. I was there at 7:20. One security man, outside, barely visible from the window if you weren't looking. Sienna decided that was the best available version of the situation and ordered a large dark roast. That became Thursdays. Then Thursdays and occasional Wednesdays. Then, almost without either of them acknowledging how it had happened, a standing pattern that the people in Sienna's life began to notice. Dominique noticed first. Dominique noticed everything first. It was the reason she was an excellent charge nurse and an occasionally exhausting human being. You're smiling at your charts, Dominique said on a Thursday morning after Sienna came in from coffee. I smile at my charts. Not like that, you don't. Dominique studied her. Is this the ghost from the hospital? He's not a ghost. Former ghost, then. Currently corporeal. Dominique leaned on the counter. Is he a good person? Sienna thought about this seriously, which was itself probably an answer of some kind. He's a complicated person who is trying to become a better one. That's either very mature or very exhausting. Both, Sienna said. It's definitely both. She hadn't told him about Maisie. She was aware of this in the specific way you are aware of a thing you've been carrying for a while. Not with active guilt, more with the low-grade consciousness of something unresolved. The situation was still unclear. The exit plan was 60% at best. Maisie's life was not a 60% situation, but Maisie was perceptive the way only children who are raised primarily by one attentive parent tend to be. She noticed everything in her mother's face, filed it, and brought it up at unexpected moments. You're happy, Maisie said at dinner 2 weeks after the coffee pattern started. Accusatorially, as though happiness was a thing her mother had been withholding. I'm always happy. No, usually you're tired and mostly happy. Today you're just happy. Sienna pointed at the pasta. Eat. Maisie ate 3 bites and then looked up. Is it a person? Why would it be a person? Because you checked your phone 6 times, and you don't usually do that unless it's work, and it's not work. Sienna stared at her daughter, 6 years old. 6 years old and cataloging behavioral patterns. There's someone I've been talking to, Sienna said carefully. An old friend. From where? College. Maisie processed this. Is it a boy? Yes. Maisie went back to her pasta with an air of satisfaction. Okay, she said. That's it? That's it? Okay. Grandma says you need friends. A pause. She also says you need a boyfriend, but I think that's different. Your grandmother says a lot of things. She says that too. Sienna was still working out how to feel about this conversation when her phone buzzed. Declan. Something came up this afternoon. Nothing dangerous. I'll explain Thursday. Sorry for the short message. She typed back, fine. Take care of what you need to. His response was immediate. Thank you for saying that like you mean it. She did mean it. That was the part she hadn't expected. The Thursday he finally told her about the specific obstacle, the man he wouldn't name in the pharmacy, was the Thursday that changed the shape of everything. She knew it was changing while it was happening. She couldn't stop it. They were at the coffee place on Michigan. He'd arrived looking like someone who hadn't slept, which for Declan meant a specific tightness around the eyes and a stillness even more concentrated than his usual. His security man was outside but standing closer to the window than before. There's been a complication, he said. How bad? Bad. The man I mentioned, his name is Garrett Hale. He stopped when he saw her face. What? That's my last name. I know, no relation, I checked. He exhaled. He's become aware that I'm not simply restructuring. He sent someone to talk to my lawyers 2 days ago. Not a lawyer. Someone who waits in parking structures. He threatened your lawyers. He reminded them, in the specific language these reminders take, that their client had outstanding obligations that superseded any exit arrangements. Sienna set her coffee down. Declan, this is... I know. This man knows your lawyers, which means he has people watching you, which means... She stopped. Her voice had dropped to a near whisper without her deciding to. Does he know where you go on Thursdays? The pause before Declan answered was less than a second, but she'd gotten good at reading his pauses. I don't know, he said. The words landed flat and cold between them. She looked at the window, at the security man outside, who was now scanning the street in a direction he hadn't been scanning before. At the other people in the coffee shop, ordinary people in winter coats, and the irrational and entirely rational thought that any of them could be someone who waited in parking structures. I have a daughter, she said, very quietly. Not accusing, stating. I know. She's 6 years old and she has never been involved in anything more dangerous than a school parking lot, and I will not... She stopped, pressed her fingers flat on the table, breathed. I will not let her become a pressure point. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? His face had gone very still. Yes. Do you actually understand? Because you made that decision for me once before and I didn't get a vote. And if you're about to make it again, I'm not, Sienna. His voice was low and careful, the specific register of someone trying to say something true without making it worse. I'm not going to make decisions for you. That is precisely why I'm telling you this instead of disappearing again. She looked at him for a long time. And there it was. The thing she had not been ready to see 3 weeks ago. The thing that had been accumulating in coffee cups and short messages, and the way he always made sure she could leave first. Not the man she'd fallen in love with at 22. Something different. Someone who had learned, through years of surviving in the specific way he'd survived, that honesty was more expensive than lies and was choosing to pay it anyway. She wanted to be furious at him. She'd built a very solid case for being furious. 7 years of materials. The eviction notice in the drawer. The mornings with Maisie, when the broken zipper got her down the stairs, and the check engine light got her to school, and she'd done all of it without anyone who should have been there. But he was looking at her with the particular expression of a man who understood he was asking for something he hadn't earned and was asking anyway because the alternative was disappearing again. And she was so exhausted by disappearing, by people who left, by problems that left, by her own capacity for surviving things that shouldn't require this much surviving, that she sat there and felt, with absolute terrible clarity, that she was not going to walk away from this table tonight. That terrified her more than the man named Garrett Hale, more than the security man outside, more than 60% and the variables Declan couldn't control. I need you to be honest with me, she said, not when it's convenient, not when you've already figured out how to manage the information, every time, even when it's bad. Yes. And I need to be able to make my own decisions about what risks I accept for myself. Yes. And Maisie, her voice tightened. She didn't let it break. Maisie is not negotiable. She is the first thing and the last thing, and if anything I do ever, I know. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Not grabbing, not holding, just covering, the way you cover something you're trying to keep warm. I know. She didn't pull her hand away. Outside, a car slowed at the curb. The security man tracked it. It kept going. Ordinary traffic. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Not really. Not anymore. The world outside that coffee shop window had been reclassified, quietly and without ceremony, into something that required attention. She felt it in the way she felt things she'd rather not feel. In the pit of the stomach, below the level of language. She had made a decision tonight without fully deciding to. The coffee had gone cold, and the decision was made, and she could see it clearly now, the shape of what she'd agreed to without saying yes. She was going to keep showing up to this table. She was going to keep listening. She was going to let him show her whether the 60% became something worth counting on. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in the drawer where she kept the eviction notice and the unresolved things, she knew there was a conversation she hadn't had yet, a name she hadn't said, a piece of information that changed everything about this situation, and that Declan Voss was going to have to face sooner than either of them were ready for. She would tell him about Maisie's eyes, not tonight, not until she knew the ground was solid enough to bear it. But the clock on that silence had started. 3 days after the Thursday that changed everything, Sienna found the photograph. She wasn't looking for it. She wasn't looking for anything. She was sitting at the nurse's station between patients, doing the thing she sometimes did when the shift went quiet, which was scroll through her phone without purpose or destination. She'd been searching for a bakery near Maisie's school that supposedly did birthday cakes without artificial dye, because Maisie's birthday was in 6 weeks, and she'd been putting off the planning the way she put off everything that required bandwidth she didn't have. The photo appeared in a news aggregator she'd forgotten she'd downloaded. Local crime reporting, Chicago Tribune adjacent. The headline was brief, and the photograph was not. It was wide, taken from across a street, slightly grainy in the way surveillance-adjacent photography tends to be. 3 men outside a restaurant in River North. 2 of them she didn't recognize. The third was Declan. The caption identified him by name. Declan Voss, 30, associated with the Carrera Criminal Organization. The article was 4 days old. She read it twice. Then she put her phone face down on the desk and sat very still for approximately 90 seconds until a call light went off in Bay 7, and she had somewhere to put her body. She did not text him. She worked her remaining 4 hours with the specific mechanical precision that kicks in when the emotional part of the brain has been quietly locked in a back room for safekeeping. She answered questions. She checked vitals. She updated charts. She smiled at the elderly woman in Bay 3 who was recovering from a fall and kept apologizing for being a bother, and told her she wasn't a bother, and meant it, even though the part of her that meant things was currently operating on about 30% capacity. At 4:15, she texted him, "I need to talk to you. Not Thursday. Tonight if possible." He responded in under 2 minutes. "I can be wherever you are by 7. She named the coffee place. Not neutral ground anymore, but familiar, which was the closest she could get to comfortable right now. He arrived at 6:52. He looked at her face when he sat down and did not waste time. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. She put her phone on the table between them. The article was still open. She watched him look at it, watched his jaw settle into a line she hadn't seen before. Not surprised, but something worse than surprised. Something that looked like a man recognizing a specific damage he'd been half expecting and finding it just as bad as he'd calculated. "How old is this photo?" she said. "The photo itself, 6 months at least. The article picked it up recently." "That's the restaurant, the one in the article. That's where your meeting was." "Yes." "With who?" He looked up from the phone. "A man named Solis. He runs the Eastern distribution for the organization. I've been trying to negotiate a clean transfer of the legitimate businesses he oversees. The meeting was part of that process. The article calls it a known criminal gathering point. The article is using language designed to get clicks. The meeting was a negotiation." "Declan." Her voice came out flat and precise. "I'm not asking you to defend the framing. I'm asking you whether you are still, actively, currently, operating inside this organization." The pause. She'd learned his pauses by now. This one was 2 full seconds, which was the longest she'd measured. "Operationally," he said, "I am still technically classified within the structure, yes. The exit is not—" "You told me you were dismantling it." "I am dismantling it. From inside it. You cannot dismantle something from the outside. They don't let you near enough to. You told me you were trying to get out. She kept her voice low. The coffee shop had 4 other occupied tables. You told me 60%. That's still accurate. That means 40% chance you don't get out. Yes. And while you're working your 60% exit plan, you are still going to meetings in restaurants that the Tribune photographs from across the street. I don't have the option of not going to those meetings. If I stop going, it signals evacuation. If it signals evacuation, people get hurt. Yes, you explained that. She folded her hands on the table. Her voice was very even, and she was going to keep it that way. Here's what I'm hearing, Declan. I'm hearing that you are not on your way out. You are in, fully in. And the exit is a plan, not a reality. And you have been sitting across from me for weeks telling me about the plan as though it were already happening. It is happening. The timeline is, don't manage me. Quiet. Hard. I am not one of your negotiations. Don't give me a timeline that's designed to keep me at the table. He stopped. His hands were flat on the table surface. She could see the knuckle damage on his right hand more clearly in this light. Old scars, reset wrong, the kind of thing that doesn't heal the way it should when you don't let it rest. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, something stripped of the careful composure he usually maintained, something that looked almost like grief. You're right, he said. Don't do that. Do what? Capitulate immediately. I can't tell if that's honest or strategic, and right now I need to be able to tell. He sat back, ran a hand through his hair once, quick, frustrated, and left it roughed up at the temple. I have been honest with you about everything that I could be honest about without putting you in more danger than the honesty itself creates. That is not the same as telling you everything, and I know that distinction matters to you. It matters considerably. I know. He met her eyes. Yes, I am still inside the structure. Yes, the exit has complications I have minimized in the way I've presented them to you. Yes, Garrett Hale is a more serious problem than I have indicated. I is not simply watching my lawyers. He has begun watching adjacent to me, people I'm in contact with. The bottom of Sienna's stomach dropped about 3 inches. Define adjacent, she said. The coffee place on Michigan. Someone was inside last Thursday. Not threatening, observing. I was made aware afterward. She stared at him. You knew that and you didn't tell me. I was assessing whether... Declan. She leaned forward. Someone was inside this coffee shop watching us, and you assessed whether to tell me. You decided to manage the information. I was trying to determine the level of... Stop! She pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Stop explaining the process. The result of the process is that you sat across from me for 3 days knowing someone had eyes on us and said nothing. That is the same thing you did 7 years ago. Different scale, exact same architecture. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. This one had weight in it. Not the weight of thinking, but the weight of being seen doing the thing you know you shouldn't be doing. Yes, he said finally, it is. She sat back, looked at the table, at her coffee, which she hadn't touched since he'd arrived, at the window, where the November street was wet from an earlier rain and reflected the headlights of passing cars in long orange streaks. I have a daughter, she said. I keep saying this because I keep needing you to understand it at the level where it actually lives. I'm not saying it to remind you of an obligation. I'm saying it because she is the specific thing that makes the difference between risk I can absorb and risk I cannot. I understand. Maisie cannot... She stopped, started again. There's something I haven't told you about Maisie. He went very still, and this was the moment. She had not planned for it to be this moment. She'd wanted ground solid enough to bear it, and the ground currently felt like it was actively shifting beneath her feet. But she also understood, sitting across from a man who had just admitted to withholding information while defending the withholding, that the time for waiting for perfect conditions had passed. She's 6, Sienna said. She'll be 7 in January. She held his eyes. I was 23 when I found out I was pregnant. You'd been gone for about 8 months. The stillness in Declan deepened into something absolute. His breathing didn't change, she was watching for it, but his hands, flat on the table, pressed slightly harder against the surface. Sienna. His voice was barely above a whisper. I need you to hear the whole thing before you say anything. Her voice was steadier than she felt. I I made every decision alone. I was terrified. I had $300 in savings and a lease expiring in 2 months, and I had to decide what I was doing entirely by myself. And I did. I decided, and I've been deciding ever since. Every school choice, every doctor's appointment, every morning and every night. Alone. She paused. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you're sitting across from me with a 40% probability of not making it out of your situation, and you just told me someone was watching us in this coffee shop, and I cannot keep this information compartmentalized any longer because it affects the calculation in ways that I can't manage by myself. Declan's jaw was working slightly, like there were words in there that hadn't found their shape yet. She has your eyes, Sienna said quietly. I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. She doesn't have a lot of you on the surface, but the eyes, the way she goes still when she's thinking hard, I knew. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a name for. It started in his eyes and moved through his jaw and down into his throat, and he swallowed once, hard, and looked at the table for a long moment before looking back up. Does she... He stopped, cleared his throat. Does she know? About me? No, she knows there's a man I've been having coffee with. She knows nothing else. Okay. He said this very quietly, like he was repeating a word he needed to hear himself say. Okay. I need you to understand what this means. Sienna's voice was beginning to show its edges now. Not breaking, but thinning. It means Maisie is not theoretically connected to your world. She is actually biologically connected to it, which means Garrett Hale, or anyone else who is watching adjacent to you, watching this coffee shop, watching your contact list. They're not adjacent to a nurse you've been having coffee with. They're adjacent to your child. Declan went completely white. It happened in real time, visible, like blood leaving a room. His face didn't crumple. He wasn't built for that kind of response. But the color went out of it entirely, and what replaced it was something she'd never seen on anyone's face quite like that. The specific expression of a person whose understanding of their own damage has just expanded catastrophically beyond what they thought they'd done. Christ, he said, barely audible. Yeah. He pushed his chair back from the table, stood, walked 3 steps toward the window and stopped, hands in his pockets, facing the glass. She watched his shoulders. They were very rigid, the way things get rigid when they're holding too much. She didn't try to fill the silence. After a long moment, he turned back. His face had reorganized into something controlled, but it was the kind of controlled that's built on top of something enormous, visible in the tension at the hinges of his jaw, in the way he was breathing, slightly deeper than normal. I need to make some calls tonight, he said. I know. I need to... He stopped. The level of exposure is different now. Everything I've been managing, the timeline, the approach to Hale, it was calculated for one level of risk. This is a different level. I know that too. Are you and Maisie... He couldn't finish it. The first sentence she'd ever seen him unable to finish. We're home. We're in our apartment. Nobody knows who she is in relation to you. That needs to stay true. For as long as possible, that needs to stay completely... Declan. She stood, crossed to where he was standing by the window. She was close enough to see the pulse at his throat, elevated. I'm not panicking. I need you to not panic either. I'm telling you this so we're working with the same information. That's all. He looked down at her. Something moved in his expression that had nothing to do with strategy. I'm sorry, he said. And then again differently. Sienna, I don't know how to... Don't. She said it gently, not harshly. Don't spiral into the apology. There will be time for what I'm owed. Right now I need you functional. He breathed in, breathed out. His hands came out of his pockets, and for a moment he didn't seem to know what to do with them. Okay, he said. Okay. She went back to the table, collected her coat and her bag with the practical efficiency of a person who had learned that forward motion was more useful than falling apart. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. Sienna. She stopped. I'm going to fix this, he said. I know I don't have the right to ask you to believe that, but I need you to hear me say it. She looked at him across the length of the coffee shop. The overhead light was harsh and fluorescent, and it made him look older than he was, stripped of the careful image she suspected he usually maintained. He looked like a 30-year-old man who had made catastrophic choices and was just now understanding the full geometry of them. I heard you, she said. She left. The drive home took 11 minutes. She checked her mirrors twice at lights, not because she expected anything, but because Declan had sat in this coffee shop knowing someone had been watching and said nothing, and now she drove like someone who had learned to pay attention. She paid Mrs. Kowalski from down the hall, who occasionally watched Maisie in the evenings. Got inside. Maisie was asleep on the couch in front of a nature documentary, arms flung wide, mouth open. The TV was showing an aerial view of the Amazon and narrating something about water systems. Sienna stood over her daughter for a moment. Dark hair. Sienna's no. Sienna's stubbornness, probably. And those eyes. The ones Sienna had spent 6 years explaining to herself as coincidence, as tricks of light, as the ordinary biological chaos of feature inheritance. She picked Maisie up carefully. Maisie stirred, made a small, disgruntled noise, pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and went completely back under. Sienna carried her to bed, tucked her in, stood at the doorway for longer than she'd intended. Her phone buzzed. Declan, I've pulled my security team back to a wider perimeter. Your building is being watched, but by my people, not Hale's. I want you to know that without it feeling threatening, it's protective. I understand if that also feels threatening. She stared at the message, typed back. How long has your security been watching my building? His response? Since the pharmacy. I should have told you. I'm telling you now. She read this twice. 3 times. Set the phone down on the kitchen counter, picked it up again. She typed, That's not your call to make. His response came fast. You're right. I know. I'm trying to learn the difference between protecting and controlling. I don't have it down yet. She set the phone down again. The radiator knocked. The documentary was still going in the living room, something about rainfall now. She turned it off and stood in the sudden quiet of her apartment, and she let herself feel, just for a moment, in the dark, without the managed competence she wore everywhere else, the complete and exhausting weight of the situation she was now in. She was not naive. She understood that she had walked into this with more information than most people have when they make dangerous decisions, and she had walked in anyway. That was on her. She owned that part. But she'd been operating on the assumption that she controlled the level of exposure, that she could regulate the proximity, decide the terms. Declan's people had been watching her building since the pharmacy. She had not decided that. She had not been consulted. The decision had been made for her by a man who was genuinely trying to keep her safe and who did not yet understand, at the level where understanding becomes instinct, that safety imposed without consent is its own kind of violence. She went to bed. She did not sleep quickly. At 2 in the morning, her phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't answer. At 2:03, it rang again. She silenced it. At 2:17, a text came from Declan's number. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize tonight. I'll explain in the morning. You're safe. She sat up, turned her bedside lamp on. You're safe was not a phrase you sent at 2 in the morning if everything was fine. She typed, What is happening right now? His response took 4 minutes, long enough for her pulse to do things she didn't appreciate. Hale made a move tonight. Not toward you, I'm handling it. My people are outside your building. You do not need to do anything except stay inside until morning. She read this. Read it again. She got up, went to the window, slowly, carefully, staying back from the glass the way she'd seen in enough crime dramas to know you didn't stand directly in front of it. The street below was quiet. A car she didn't recognize was parked across from her building, dark sedan. She couldn't tell from this angle if it was occupied. She stepped back from the window. Garrett Hale had made a move tonight. The exit plan that was 60% probable had just, in real time, in the dark, on a Tuesday night in November, collided with the 40%. And Sienna Hale stood in her bedroom in the city where she'd built her whole life from nothing, in the apartment she was 30 days from losing, with a 6-year-old asleep down the hall who had never done anything to deserve any of this, and felt the specific, terrible clarity of a person who has run out of the option of half measures. She picked up her phone, typed, I need you to be in front of my building at 7 a.m., not your people, you. I need to look at your face when you tell me what happened tonight, because I will not manage this through text messages anymore. His response was immediate. I'll be there. She put the phone down, sat on the edge of her bed. The apartment was very quiet around her, and the dark sedan was still across the street, and tomorrow was Wednesday, and she needed to get Maisie to school by 7:45. And the whole architecture of her ordinary life was pressing against the walls of a situation that was no longer ordinary by any definition she could construct. She had told him about Maisie. The information was in the world now, irretrievable, and everything it touched had changed shape accordingly. There was no version of tomorrow that looked like yesterday. There was no pulling this back to the managed tentative thing it had been 3 weeks ago when she'd said Saturday and chosen the green sweater and told herself it was a formality. This was not a formality. It had never been. She lay back down, left the lamp on. The light held the room in a dim orange that reminded her, with a lurch she wasn't prepared for, of the nightlight in Maisie's room, the pale orange that her daughter had insisted on since she was 3, because complete dark was too much dark, and just a little light was exactly right. Just a little light was exactly right. Sienna pressed her hand over her face, breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. The same rhythm she used with patients who were frightened, the same rhythm she'd used on herself in a hospital bathroom at 23, when the test result was real, and the choices were real, and there was no one else in the room. By 3 a.m. she had made a decision, not about Declan, not about the situation in the abstract. A specific, concrete decision about what she was going to say at 7 a.m. when he was standing in front of her building, and what she was going to require of him, and what the price of her continued presence in his life was going to be. Because she understood now, with the kind of understanding that arrives only in the small hours of a night that won't end, that there was no middle ground anymore. Either he got out completely and irreversibly, and she helped him do it in whatever way she could help, or she took Maisie and disappeared, and this time it would be her doing the disappearing. She would give him the chance to choose, but she would only give it once, and she would need, when the sun came up and she looked at his face on the sidewalk below, to know beyond the margin of the 60%, to see it in the way he breathed, in the way he stood, and the way he answered her before he had time to manage the answer. Whether the man in front of her was capable of becoming someone her daughter could safely know existed, because Maisie was going to know he existed. Sienna had decided that in the dark, at 3 in the morning, with the lamp on and the orange light and the quiet that was too quiet, Maisie was going to know, but only if the man was worth the knowing. He was there at 6:58. Sienna saw him from the window before she went down, standing on the sidewalk below, no coat despite the cold, hands not in his pockets for once but at his sides, a posture she'd never seen on him before. Open, unguarded, like he'd decided somewhere between 2 a.m. and 6:58 that armor was the wrong choice for this particular conversation. She got Maisie up, fed her toast and half a banana, braided her hair once, straight, no retry. Her hands were steadier than they had any right to be. She called Mrs. Kowalski and arranged for Maisie to be walked to school because she was going to be unavailable for the next hour. And Maisie accepted this with the equanimity of a child who has learned that her mother sometimes has complicated mornings. "Is it the boy?" Maisie asked, pulling on her coat. "Go brush your teeth." "That means yes. Teeth, now." Maisie went, satisfied. Sienna stairs at 7:02, pushed through the lobby door. The cold hit her immediately, sharp, damp, the specific November cold of Chicago that gets into the joints and stays there. Declan turned when he heard the door. He looked like a man who had not slept, not the managed version of tired she'd seen on him before, the kind he wore like another layer of composure. This was actual exhaustion, visible in the shadows under his eyes, and the slight disorganization of everything about him. The unshaved jaw, the sweater that wasn't quite right for the temperature. She stopped 2 feet from him. "Talk," she said. He talked. Garrett Hale had sent 2 men to the offices of Declan's primary attorney at 11:15 the previous night. Not to threaten, to deliver a document, a contract, technically, though the word was almost comedic in context. A formal declaration that Declan Voss's interests in 4 specific legitimate business entities, currently in the process of being transferred to clean ownership, were to be considered frozen pending a resolution of outstanding organizational obligations. The document had no legal standing. It didn't need legal standing. It was a message in the language of the world Declan occupied, and the message was, "You do not get to leave on your own terms." "He froze the transfers," Sienna said. "He attempted to. My attorney has options, but exercising those options creates noise, and noise creates acceleration. People get nervous." She'd learned the vocabulary. She hated that she'd learned it. What was the move against you personally? Two of Hale's people followed my car from the attorney's office. Not subtly, overtly. They wanted me to know they were there. Why overtly? Because the message wasn't just about the transfers. It was about capacity. He was showing me how many people he could put on this simultaneously. Declan's breath came out in a thin cloud in the cold air. He was also outside a specific location at 10:30 last night. She went very still. Which location? Maisie's school. The sidewalk seemed to tilt slightly. She made herself stand level. He was outside her school. Not inside, not on school property. He was in a car across the street for approximately 22 minutes and then he left. My people logged it and called me immediately. He held her gaze. I'm telling you this with complete clarity because you told me to and because you deserve it. I'm not managing this information. I'm giving it to you entire. Sienna breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth, the same rhythm. She pressed it together with both hands metaphorically. The panic and the fury and the cold particular terror of hearing that someone had sat in a car across from her daughter's school and held it. He doesn't know who she is to you, she said. If he knew, he'd have done something more than sit in a car. Correct. She appears to be on a list of people in your life, contacts, routine surveillance of your pattern. He's building a picture of your connections. A pause. He doesn't know my connection to her, but he will. People who do what Hale does eventually find what they're looking for. How long do we have before he finds it? Days? Maybe less. She turned and looked at the street, at the dark sedan still parked across from her building, at the ordinary morning traffic moving past it, at a woman walking a dog on the opposite sidewalk, scarf wound 3 times around her neck, moving briskly and without any awareness of the conversation happening 20 feet from her. That woman's morning was clean and ordinary. Sienna's morning was the conversation she was having, and she understood with complete clarity that there was no version of ordinary available to her anymore in which she did nothing. She turned back to Declan. What do you need to end this, she said. Not the exit plan, not the 60%. What do you need to make Garrett Hale stop? He looked at her for a long moment. You don't want to ask that question. I'm asking it. Sienna, my daughter's school. Each word separate. He sat outside my daughter's school. Tell me what ends it. Declan looked at the sidewalk, then up. His jaw was tight, the kind of tight that means the answer is already there and he's deciding whether to say it. Hale is positioned the way he is because he controls one specific piece of information that the legitimate businesses need him not to release. It's financial. Records from a period I was involved in that would implicate the transferred companies if made public. He's holding it as insurance against my exit. If that information were neutralized, made irrelevant, or made equally damaging to him as to me, he loses his leverage. How do you neutralize it? There's a federal investigator, a woman named Carver, with the Financial Crimes Division. She's been building a case against Hale independently, not against me, against him specifically, for activities that predate my involvement. I have material that would complete her case. I've been withholding it because presenting it means walking into a federal building, and walking into a federal building means exposure. Complete exposure. Everything. Every association, every transaction, every year of my involvement. I walk in with that material, and I walk out as a federal witness. Full cooperation. Everything I've managed and protected and kept quiet for 8 years becomes part of a federal record. But Hale goes down. Hale goes down completely. His people scatter. His leverage disappears. And you? I negotiate. Full cooperation typically comes with, there are provisions. But yes, there is a version of this where I serve time. Not long, but time. She absorbed this. The cold pressed in around the edges of her coat. How long have you known this was an option? She said. Since approximately the 3rd week of October. The 3rd week of October. She was doing the math without wanting to. The coffee place, the Wednesdays, the Thursdays, Maisie saying you're just happy now, and her mother not being able to explain why. You've been sitting across from me for a month, she said, knowing that the cleanest exit available to you required walking into a federal building, and you didn't take it. He looked at her, said nothing. Because of me, she said. I didn't know if you'd... He stopped. Started over. I didn't know if there was anything here worth blowing up 8 years of carefully maintained position for. And then I knew, and by the time I knew, I was also... He exhaled sharply. I was afraid. She blinked. You were afraid. I've been afraid approximately once in the last 8 years, and that was the night my uncle went into surgery, and I wasn't sure he'd come out. I wasn't built for it anymore. And the idea of... He stopped again. The idea of disappearing into a federal process, a negotiation that takes months and strips everything down to nothing, and not knowing what was on the other side of it, whether you would still... Stop, she said quietly. He stopped. You were protecting a maybe, she said. You were protecting the possibility of me, instead of doing the thing that actually made me possible. He looked like that landed where it was supposed to land. Yeah, he said. That's it exactly. She looked at him for a long moment. At his face in the cold morning light, tired, unguarded, showing her something she suspected he'd kept locked down for the better part of a decade. Not a performance, not strategy. A 30-year-old man who had made too many wrong calls and was standing in front of her, running out of chances to make a right one. Make the call, she said. Sienna, make the call to the federal investigator. Today, before Maisie gets out of school. She stepped forward, close enough that she could keep her voice completely low and have it still reach him. You said you wanted to be the man you should have been. That man makes the call. Right now, not after more calculation. His throat moved. I could be looking at... I know what you could be looking at. Make the call. He pulled his phone from his pocket. She watched his hands. Steady, she noticed. Steadier than hers would have been. He scrolled. Found a number she'd never seen him dial before. Put the phone to his ear. It rang twice. Carver, he said. It's Voss. I'm ready to come in. The 3 days that followed were the longest of Sienna's life, including the 3 days in 2018 when a 23-year-old woman had sat in a series of waiting rooms making decisions that would define the next 6 years. These 3 days were longer because at least in 2018 the only life at stake was hers. These 3 days had Maisie's school in them, and a man with a frozen transfer agreement and no patience, and a federal process that moved at the specific pace of institutional machinery, which is to say, not fast enough. Declan met with Agent Carver on a Thursday morning, not the coffee place Thursday. A federal building in the Loop, 7th floor, a conference room with a view of the river that he described to Sienna afterward in the specific detail of someone who had been staring at it for hours while lawyers argued around him. She did not go with him. He had not asked her to. Understood, by now, that there were categories of involvement she would not accept. Not because she didn't care about the outcome, but because Maisie's legal and physical distance from federal proceedings was not negotiable. What she did instead was go to work. She triaged. She updated charts. She sat for 4 minutes with an elderly man, not the same one as before, a different one, a newer grief, and held his hand while he described his wife. Dominique appeared at the nurse's station at noon and put coffee in front of her without speaking. This was the highest form of Dominique's affection. You look like you're deciding something, Dominique said. I already decided. Then you look like someone who decided something big and is waiting to see if it was right. That one, Sienna said. That one is accurate. Declan called her at 4:17 from a number she didn't recognize. A lawyer's phone, as it turned out. The number rotated as a precaution. It's going, he said. Carver has the material. The case filing is in motion. It takes time to become official, and during that window, Hale can still act. The assessment is that once he becomes aware that I've made contact with Carver, he'll prioritize his own exit over retaliating against me. His exposure is substantial. The calculation for him becomes self-preservation. And if his calculation is different, a pause, then we manage it. We, she said. Yes. He said it simply, without making it large. We. She hung up and sat in the break room for a moment and thought about all the things that word contained. The call came at 11:40 p.m. on a Friday night. Not Declan's number, not the lawyer's number, an unknown cell that she almost didn't answer, except that she'd been sleeping badly and was already half awake, and something made her pick up. It was a man's voice she didn't know, flat, professional, with the specific affect of someone delivering a message and not an opinion. Miss Hale, Mr. Voss asked me to contact you. He's been detained, not federally. This is not an official action. He's being held at a location, and he wanted you to know that his team is aware and it's being managed. He specifically asked that you not contact anyone, not go anywhere, and stay inside your apartment until he or his attorney contacts you directly. He said to tell you, a brief pause. He said to tell you that Maisie's school has additional coverage tonight. He said you'd know what that means. The line went dead. Sienna sat up in bed, turned on the lamp. The orange light filled the room. Garrett Hale had moved. Not the surveillance and document version of a move. The actual version. She was out of bed before she'd consciously decided to move. Down the hall, into Maisie's room. She was there, asleep, arms wide, the nightlight warm and steady, and her daughter completely unaware, making the small rhythmic sounds of a child in deep, uncomplicated sleep. Sienna stood in the doorway. Her hands were shaking now. Not the pen-clicking kind, the real kind, where the body overrules the managed composure and insists on being honest about how frightened it is. Maisie made a small sound. Shifted. Her arm came to rest across her own face, which was something she did when she was almost about to wake up. Sienna stepped back from the doorway, went to the kitchen, put water on for tea that she would not drink, stood at the counter with both hands flat against it, and let herself feel the terror fully for approximately 30 seconds, the complete, undiluted version, and then she put it somewhere and moved past it, because terror was not useful, and she had a child asleep down the hall, and a man who was currently detained somewhere in this city on her behalf. She pulled up the text thread with Declan's number, typed, "I got the call. I'm inside. Maisie is fine. Come back." She stared at the message for a moment. Added, "Don't do anything stupid." Sent it. The read receipt never appeared. His phone was presumably not with him. She sat at the kitchen table and waited. At 2:30 a.m., her buzzer went off. She went to the intercom. Not the door. The intercom, like someone who had learned in the past 72 hours to make that distinction, and pressed the button. "It's me." Declan's voice, rough at the edges. "I'm outside. I'm alone. I'm fine." She buzzed him in. He came through her apartment door looking like a man who had been through something physical and was maintaining vertical orientation through determination rather than comfort. Left side of his face, not the jaw she'd noticed the knuckle damage through, the other side, was beginning to discolor at the cheekbone. His jacket was torn at the left shoulder seam. He was holding his right side slightly, the way people hold something that hurts when they breathe deeply. She looked at all of this in approximately 2 seconds. "Sit down," she said. Sit down, Declan." He sat. The kitchen chair made a sound under the abruptness of it, like he'd been holding himself up longer than he'd intended, and the sitting was a relief his body insisted on despite the permission she'd had to give. She got the first aid kit from the cabinet under the sink, sat across from him, turned on the overhead light. "Where else?" she said. "Right side. Ribs. Probably not broken. I've had broken ribs and this is adjacent." Adjacent meaning bruised or adjacent meaning cracked? One of those. She pressed her fingers carefully along his right side. He hissed, sharp, through his teeth, when she found the area. Not broken, badly bruised. She'd have preferred an X-ray, and she was not going to say that right now. "Hale's people," she said, working on the cut at his cheekbone with antiseptic and the specific focused attention she gave to everything that required her hands to be steadier than the rest of her. "2 of them. In a parking structure near the attorney's office. They weren't there to kill me. If that was the purpose, it would have been different." He said this very matter-of-factly, which was somehow more disturbing than if he'd said it with drama. "They were there to deliver a message physically, to demonstrate that the federal process doesn't make me untouchable during the window before it becomes official." And the message? "Withdraw the material from Carver, or the next message is delivered to a different address." She stopped working, looked at him. "Your address or mine?" The implication was flexible. Her hands were very steady. She was aware of how steady they were as a specific act of will. She went back to the cut. "What did you tell them?" she said. "Nothing. I wasn't in a position to tell anyone anything for approximately 40 minutes. My team located the vehicle and resolved the situation." "Your team resolved it?" "Yes." "Are the people on your team, are they safe?" He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. "My people are fine. You're asking about my people. You employ them. They're in this because of decisions you made." She pressed a piece of gauze against his cheekbone, held it. "Of course I'm asking about your people." He was quiet for a moment in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. "They're fine," he said again, softer. She taped the gauze, sat back, looked at the full picture of him. The discolored cheekbone, the torn jacket, the way he was breathing shallowly on the right side to manage the ribs. "Pull the material back from Carver," she said. He stared at her. "What? You heard me?" "Sienna, if I pull the material, I know what happens if you pull it. I'm telling you to pull it and then resubmit it through a different channel, with my name on the chain of custody as a secondary contact, with documentation that the submission is independent of your direct involvement." She watched his face. "If Hale's leverage is specifically your cooperation with Carver, you remove yourself from the equation. The material still gets there. You just don't carry it through the door." He was very still. "That only works if Carver accepts a secondary submission." "I know, which is why you're going to call her tonight and she's going to accept it because the material is the same material regardless of who walks it in, and she has been building this case for 2 years and she is not going to turn down the piece that completes it because of a chain of custody technicality." She held his gaze. "Am I wrong?" A beat. "No," he said slowly. "You're not wrong." "Then make the call." "It's 3 in the morning. You called her at 7 a.m. on a Thursday 2 days ago." She answered. "Call her." He made the call. From Sienna's kitchen table, with a piece of gauze taped to his cheekbone and his hand pressed against his right side, he called a federal investigator at 3 in the morning and renegotiated the submission chain while Sienna cleaned up the first aid materials and put the kettle back on and listened to him work through something extraordinarily complex with the focused precision of a man who had been doing complicated things in high-pressure conditions for 8 years and had gotten very good at it. When he hung up, the call had lasted 22 minutes. "It's workable," he said. "The documentation timeline is, tell me tomorrow." She put tea in front of him. He looked at it like he'd forgotten tea was a thing that existed. "Drink that. Where are you sleeping tonight?" He looked up. "I'm not asking that romantically," she said. "I'm asking practically. You have bruised or possibly cracked ribs and a cut on your face, and you are not driving anywhere in this condition, and I have a couch." "Sienna, it folds out. It's not comfortable. You don't have to be comfortable." She sat down across from him again. Her voice dropped. "I'm not going to sleep if you're not somewhere I can account for." He looked at her across the table. In the overhead light, in the ordinary furniture, and the kettle still steaming and the first aid kit open on the counter, something moved through his expression that she didn't try to name. He looked like a man who hadn't been taken care of in a very long time, and was not sure he deserved to be now. "Okay," he said. "I was asleep on the couch before midnight made it to 1 a.m. Sienna knew because she checked. Twice. The way she checked Maisie. At 6:15, Maisie woke up and padded out to the kitchen and found a man asleep on the couch, and came back to her mother's doorway and said, with the volume modulation of a child who hasn't had breakfast yet, "Mom, there's a man on the couch." "I know," Sienna whispered. "He's a friend. He got hurt. Quiet." Maisie looked back toward the living room, then at her mother. "His face is hurt." "I know. Inside voice, please." "Okay." Maisie went back to the kitchen and climbed onto her chair at the table with the focused independence of a child who has learned that adults have complicated situations and breakfast is non-negotiable regardless. "Can I have cereal?" "Yes." "The one with the stars." "Get the one with the stars." Maisie got the one with the stars, poured her own milk, sat eating with the quiet concentration of a 6-year-old who was very busy processing something while appearing to eat cereal. At 6:35, Declan woke up. Sienna heard him, the specific sound of someone becoming conscious in an unfamiliar space, the slight disorientation. She was already in the kitchen with her coffee, angled so she could see the living room. He sat up, looked at the room, looked at his hands, then looked toward the kitchen where Maisie was at the table with her cereal. Maisie looked at him. He looked at Maisie. Sienna held very still. "Hi," Maisie said. Not shy, direct. She'd never been shy in her life. "Hi," Declan said. His voice was rough from sleep. He cleared it. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be on your couch." "That's okay." Maisie turned her spoon over once. "Your face is hurt." "Yeah." "My mom fixed it, though. She's good at that." A pause. "She's a nurse." I know. He was watching her with an action that Sienna couldn't see directly from her angle, but she could see the quality of his stillness. Nothing like his usual controlled stillness, something entirely different. Something that looked, from where she stood, like a man looking at something he hadn't been prepared to see and finding it larger than expected. She's very good at it. Maisie ate another bite, looked at him sideways, the specific look she deployed when she was deciding something. Do you want cereal? She said. He blinked. Yeah, if there's enough. There's the stars, or there's the boring one with the squares. Stars, he said. Obviously. Maisie climbed down from her chair and got him a bowl with the practiced authority of a child dispensing hospitality in her own home. And Sienna stood at the edge of the kitchen and watched her daughter pour cereal for the man who didn't know he was her father, and felt something in her chest. Do something she was going to have to think about later. Not now, not in this moment, but later, when she had enough room for it. Declan sat at the table. Maisie sat across from him. They ate cereal together in the kitchen of a small apartment on a gray Saturday morning in November, while Sienna's coffee went cold in her hand. My name's Maisie, Maisie said. I know, I'm Declan. That's a weird name. It is, I've been informed. I like it, though. She scooped up a star-shaped piece. It sounds like a name from a book. What kind of book? An adventure one. She looked at him seriously, the kind where the person goes on a long trip and has to fight things and then comes home. Declan was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Yeah, he said, that kind of book. Sienna left the kitchen. She walked to the bathroom and ran cold water and pressed her wet hands against her face for 30 seconds, which was not enough time to manage what she was feeling, but was all the time she had. She went back out. Maisie was telling Declan about multiplication. He was listening with the same focused attention he gave to everything, asking specific questions at the right intervals, which was apparently something Maisie found very satisfying because she kept elaborating. Sienna's phone buzzed. Declan's attorney. The submission chain has been confirmed. Carver accepted the modified documentation. Filing moves forward today. Your name appears only as secondary contact, non-cooperative witness. Hale will be made aware of the filing status by end of day. Recommend all primary parties reduce contact and increase security protocols for the next 72 hours. 72 hours. She read it twice. Looked up. Maisie was explaining the difference between the times tables for 6 and the times tables for 7, and Declan was nodding seriously. And outside the window, the November gray had thinned enough to show something that might become actual light by afternoon. She typed back to the attorney, understood, confirmed. And then she stood there in her own living room, phone in her hand, watching her daughter talk to the man who was her father, and understood that the 72 hours between now and the moment this became official were the most dangerous hours she had navigated in her life. More dangerous than the eviction notice, more dangerous than the 3 a.m. phone call, more dangerous than any of the edges she'd stood at alone. And she was not alone at this edge. That was either the best thing that had happened to her in 7 years or the most dangerous thing, and she was no longer sure the distinction mattered, because the filing was moving, and Hale would know by end of day, and the next 72 hours were going to determine whether the man sitting at her kitchen table eating cereal with her daughter got to come back to this table when it was over. She put her phone in her pocket, walked back to the kitchen. There's coffee, she said to both of them, and neither of them. Maisie held up her empty bowl. Can I have more stars? Brush your teeth first. But teeth! Maisie went, theatrical in her displeasure. Declan looked up from the table. His face in the morning light, cut on the cheekbone, bruised jaw, the tiredness in his eyes that hadn't shifted yet, was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. The filing went through, she said quietly. He held her gaze. I know. Carver texted the attorney. 72 hours. Yes. She sat down across from him at the table. In the chair Maisie had occupied. The cereal box was between them, the stars and the milk, and the completely ordinary debris of a Saturday morning breakfast. What happens now? She said. He put his hands on the table. Both of them, flat, the scarred knuckles, and the careful steadiness she'd come to read like a language. Now I do the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, he said. Which is? I wait. I let it move without touching it. I trust that the filing holds, And Carver's case is solid, and Hale makes the self-preserving choice. He exhaled slowly. I don't act, I don't manage. I sit still and I let the process work. You're terrible at sitting still. I know. Something moved in his expression. Not the ghost of the old laugh this time, but the actual one, brief and real and exhausted. I'm working on it. Maisie came back from the bathroom with her hair somehow more disheveled than when she'd left. She climbed back into her chair with the confidence of a person reclaiming their seat. More stars now? She said. More stars, Sienna said. Maisie poured her own, looked at Declan's bowl, which was almost empty, poured more into it without asking. Declan looked at the bowl, looked at the child who had just decided he needed more stars without consulting him. Thanks, he said. You're welcome, Maisie said, like it was nothing, like it was the most ordinary thing. Outside, the gray was definitely thinning now. The November light was coming in through the kitchen window in the flat, unremarkable way of a day that hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. Not quite cold enough to be dramatically wintry, not warm enough to be forgiving. 72 hours. The filing was moving, and Garrett Hale, somewhere in this city, was about to learn that the leverage he'd built his position on was already in federal hands, and the man he'd sent 2 people to a parking structure to teach a lesson to was sitting in a small kitchen in a North Side apartment eating cereal with a 6-year-old who had no idea that the world she lived in had just shifted irrevocably on its axis and would not, if the next 3 days held, shift back. Sienna wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The morning held. The 72 hours did not pass quietly. The first 12 were the worst kind of waiting, the kind where your hands need to be doing something or the mind begins its own prosecution. Sienna worked the Sunday morning shift 7 to 1, and she worked it the way she'd learned to work everything that required her to be present while carrying something heavy, by going smaller, not larger, bay by bay, patient by patient. The specific, immediate, solvable problem directly in front of her, rather than the unsolvable one sitting in a hotel room in the South Loop with a bruised jaw and the next 72 hours of his life determined by forces already in motion. She triaged a man with a broken wrist who kept apologizing for crying. She told him there was nothing to apologize for. She meant it. She started an IV line on a woman with severe dehydration who hadn't eaten in 2 days because her insurance had lapsed and the prescription she needed cost more than her weekly groceries. And Sienna updated the chart and flagged the social worker and moved to the next bay and carried that specific weight the way she carried all of them, completely, and without putting it down anywhere. Dominique appeared at 11 with coffee and the look that meant she'd been watching. You look like someone sitting on a grenade, Dominique said. I'm fine. You need to stop saying that. It's the most efficient answer. It's the least accurate answer. Dominique leaned against the counter. Is it the man? It's always something. That means yes. A pause. Is he safe? Sienna wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. The warmth was immediate and concrete, and she needed both. He's in a hotel. His people are there. The situation is moving. She looked at the cup. By Monday morning, it should be clearer. Should be. Should be. Dominique was quiet for a moment. You know what I've learned in 22 years of emergency nursing? Several things, I imagine. One specific thing. People survive the emergencies. It's the waiting that does the damage. She straightened. Bay 4 needs a chart update. Sienna updated the chart. She picked up Maisie from Patricia's at 2:15. Patricia opened the door before Sienna knocked, which meant she'd been watching from the window, which meant she'd been worrying in the specific way Patricia worried, silently, by proximity, keeping herself close to the thing she couldn't control. She ate lunch, Patricia said, both sandwiches, which I think was excessive, but she argued her case. She always argues her case. She gets that from you. Patricia looked at her daughter's face. How bad? I don't know yet. By Monday. Patricia nodded once. The nod that meant she'd heard what was said and also what wasn't. She kissed the top of Maisie's head when the child barreled past her into the entryway to collect her backpack, and then she touched Sienna's arm. Brief, the same way she'd always done it, the same gesture since Sienna was 17 and navigating things too large for 17. Come home for dinner if you need to, she said. I'm okay. I know you're okay. Come home if you need to anyway. Sienna drove home with Maisie in the back, narrating a detailed account of something that had happened at Patricia's involving a bird on the window ledge, and a significant disagreement with Patricia about whether the bird was a sparrow or a finch. The narration required no input. Sienna drove and listened, and both hands stayed on the wheel, and the check engine light was on, as it had been since August, as it would probably be forever. That night she made pasta. The butter and parmesan version, not because it was sophisticated, but because it was the one she could make without her full attention, and it was the one Maisie would eat without negotiation. She stood at the stove and watched the water boil, and thought about a hotel room in the South Loop, and a man with a bruised jaw sitting with his elbows on his knees, waiting for the next 12 hours to pass. She texted him at 7:42, "Still here." His response came in under 60 seconds. "Me too." She put the phone face down on the counter and served dinner. Maisie ate with the focused efficiency of a child who has outdoor plans after dinner that will not materialize because it was 31 degrees in November, but who doesn't know this yet? She talked about multiplication. She talked about a girl in her class named Petra who had gotten a hamster and whether hamsters were better than dogs. She talked about the book she was reading with Miss Lerner, which had a horse in it, and whether a horse would fit in their apartment, which was a question she already knew the answer to, but enjoyed revisiting periodically. "No," Sienna said, "but if the apartment were bigger." "Still no." "Why?" "Because horses require fields. We could get a field. Fields are not available in our price range." Maisie ate a forkful of pasta and considered the economics of this. "When I grow up, I'm going to have a field." "What else are you going to have?" Maisie listed these things with the completeness of someone who has thought carefully about the infrastructure of their future life. A horse, obviously. A dog, specifically a large one. A house near water, because water was good. A job that was important. A kitchen bigger than the one they had. And she added after a pause, as though it had just occurred to her, people she loved. "People first," Sienna said. Maisie looked at her. "What?" "Put people first on the list. The horse and the field come after." Maisie reconsidered the list, nodded, accepting this as a reasonable editorial note. "People first," she agreed. "Then the horse." Sienna cleared the plates. Maisie went to brush teeth. The apartment was quiet in the way it was always quiet after dinner. The particular stillness of a space that has held noise and released it, settling back into itself. Through the window, the city did what the city did. Traffic on the street below. The amber of the streetlights coming in at the angle it always came in. At 8:40, Maisie was in bed. At 9:15, Sienna was at the kitchen table with tea she was going to let go cold. She pulled the eviction notice drawer open out of habit. Not for the notice, which was paid, but because she kept things in it that she needed to acknowledge periodically. The notice was there, marked paid. Maisie's overdue field trip permission slip from October. She'd signed it 6 minutes before the deadline, standing against the hospital wall. A birthday card from a patient she'd cared for 3 years ago, who had mailed it to the hospital and Dominique had put in Sienna's locker. A photograph of her and Maisie from last Christmas, taken by Patricia on an actual film camera because Patricia did not trust digital photographs to last. She looked at the photograph for a moment. Maisie's arms were around Sienna's neck, pulling her head down at an awkward angle, laughing. Sienna in the photo was laughing too, eyes slightly squeezed shut, not looking at the camera. Nobody was posed. Nobody was ready. It was the most accurate photograph she owned. She put it back, closed the drawer. Her phone rang at 11:47. Unknown number. She answered on the second ring. The man's voice was flat and professional, and he delivered the message with the efficiency of someone accustomed to delivering messages that contained a great deal of weight in very few words. Mr. Voss had been detained. Not federally. His team was aware. It was being managed. She should stay inside, contact no one, and wait for direct communication from him or his attorney. He said to tell her that Maisie's school had additional coverage tonight. The line went dead. Sienna sat on the edge of her bed with the phone in her hand and felt the specific quality of fear that does not announce itself loudly, but arrives like a change in air pressure. A shift in the atmosphere of everything, slight and total and impossible to unfeel once felt. She was up before she'd decided to stand. Down the hall. Maisie's room. There, asleep, arms spread wide, the nightlight holding its steady orange warmth across the ceiling and the walls and the dark hair spread against the pillow. Her daughter's chest rose and fell with the deep, unconscious rhythm of a child who had no reason to be afraid of the night. Sienna stood in the doorway for a count of 10, long enough to feel the fear completely and let it do what it needed to do, and then set it somewhere manageable. She went back to the kitchen, stood at the window without pressing close to it. The street below was quiet, a Sunday night in late November, most sensible people indoors. The dark sedan that Declan's team had maintained across from her building for weeks was there. She'd come to recognize it. She'd stopped resenting it approximately 10 days ago, which was itself a data point she'd been meaning to think about more than she had. She texted Declan's number. "I got the call. I'm inside. Maisie is fine. Whatever is happening, come back." She stared at the message for a moment, added 3 words. "Don't be stupid." Sent it. The read receipt never activated. His phone was not with him. She made tea, let it go cold, made more. The apartment held her in the particular way apartments hold people who have lived in them long enough that the specific dimensions of every room are a kind of physical knowledge. She knew exactly how many steps from the kitchen to Maisie's doorway, knew the particular sound the hallway floorboard made under her left foot, knew the quality of light from every lamp at every hour. The apartment was hers in a way that went beyond rent, and she had built that belonging entirely alone, over 6 years, one ordinary day at a time. She was not going to let anyone take it from her. Not Garrett Hale. Not the 40%. Not the 7 years she and Declan had spent apart building separately what they might have built together. At 2:17 a.m., her buzzer rang. She went to the intercom. Not the door. The intercom. "It's me." His voice, recognizable even through the static, rougher than usual. "I'm alone. I came straight here." She buzzed him in. He came through her door and she performed the nurse's assessment before she performed anything else, because that was the order her brain insisted on. Left cheekbone, cut she'd already treated, holding. New bruising at the jaw, right side this time, a different blow. His jacket was torn at the left shoulder seam along the stitching, the specific tear that happens when something grabs at fabric hard enough. Right hand, the knuckles she'd memorized, split across the second and third, recent, still showing the bright color of new damage. I was holding his right side, the same ribs, and he was breathing shallowly enough that it was visible. "Sit down," she said. Declan, sit down." He sat at the kitchen table and the chair received him with a slight sound, the body's weight settling after having been held upright past the point where upright was comfortable. She got the first aid kit, pulled the chair across from him, turned on the overhead light and did not apologize for the brightness. "Right side," she said. "Same ribs. Probably not broken." "You said probably last time too." Both times were probably accurate. She pressed her fingers along his right side, feeling through the fabric. He went very still, the particular stillness of someone managing pain by controlling their response to it rather than expressing it. She found the location. He exhaled sharply through his teeth, a thin, controlled sound. "Cracked," she said. "At least one. You need imaging." "After." "After what?" "After I tell you what happened, and after whatever comes next is handled." He held her gaze. "I'll get the imaging tomorrow." She looked at him for a moment and recognized that this was the one category where pushing would not produce a different result. She went back to the kit. "Talk," she said. He talked. Hale had moved at 11 p.m. Not personally. Hale did not do things personally, which was both how he'd maintained his position for 12 years and how he'd eventually miscalculated, because men who never do things personally lose the ability to accurately assess how things actually get done. He'd sent 2 people to the parking structure adjacent to Declan's attorney's office building, which was where Declan had been meeting with his legal team to review the timeline for Monday's docketing. The encounter was not designed to kill. She'd understood that already from the phone message. Killing Declan in the 72-hour window before official docketing would accelerate federal attention rather than divert it, and Hale was not strategically reckless, only morally so. The purpose had been demonstration. The message had been delivered with 2 pairs of hands and a specific period of approximately 40 minutes, and the message was, the filing can be withdrawn before Monday, and the alternative to withdrawing it is that the next contact is made at an address that is not a parking structure. Sienna was cleaning the new cuts on his right hand while he said this. Her hands were very steady. She was aware of them being steady in the specific way you are aware of a thing you are making happen by will rather than by ease. He threatened her, she said. Not a question. The implication was flexible enough to include multiple addresses. Yes. She set the antiseptic down, picked it back up, pressed it against the split knuckles with more focus than the task required. What did you tell them? Nothing. I wasn't in a position to respond verbally for most of the 40 minutes. He said this with a flatness that told her everything about the 40 minutes she needed to know and that she was not going to ask about directly. My team located the vehicle and terminated the engagement. Your team is fine. All of them. He watched her face. You're going to ask about my people before you ask about the rest. Yes. I've answered that question before, and I'm going to keep asking it. She pressed gauze to the worst of the knuckles. Held it. Your people made choices to be involved. That doesn't mean their well-being is less important than yours. He was quiet for a moment that had nothing to do with thinking and everything to do with being seen in a way he hadn't been seen in a long time. They're fine, he said again, softer. She taped the gauze, sat back, looked at the complete picture of him in the overhead light, the new bruising, the torn jacket on the chair behind him, the shallow breathing on the right, the knuckles, the cut at the cheekbone still holding under the tape from 2 nights ago. He looked like a man who had been through the physical version of a decision and was sitting at a kitchen table at 2:30 in the morning because this was where he had chosen to come when it was over. Not the hotel, not his attorney. Here. Pull the material back from Carver, she said. He stared at her. You heard me correctly. Pull it back and resubmit it through a secondary channel with my name on the chain of custody documentation. Remove yourself as the direct point of contact for the submission. The material reaches Carver identically. You are no longer the single leverage point Hale can act against. She watched his face move through the logic. If his threat is specifically your cooperation, you make yourself the wrong target. He was still. That only works if Carver accepts a secondary submission without you being directly attached to. She's been building this case for 2 years. The material you gave her completes it. She will not discard a complete case because of a documentation technicality. Call her and tell her the chain of custody is being modified for security reasons. She understands security reasons. She held his eyes. Am I wrong? 2 seconds. The honest pause. No, he said. You're not wrong. Then make the call. Sienna, it's 2:30 in the... She answered at 7 a.m. on a Thursday. She is a federal investigator building a case against organized crime in Chicago. She is not asleep at 2:30 on a Sunday night. She put the antiseptic back in the kit, closed it, set it aside. Make the call. He picked up his phone. She watched his hands, the gauze-wrapped knuckles, the careful grip, the practiced efficiency of someone who has conducted difficult negotiations under difficult conditions for long enough that the conditions are no longer the variable. He found the number, put the phone to his ear. It rang twice. Agent Carver answered on the 3rd ring with the voice of someone who was awake, and had been, which confirmed what Sienna had said and told its own story about the last 72 hours on the federal side of this situation. The call lasted 26 minutes. Sienna made tea that she finally drank while he worked through the chain of custody modification with Carver's team. The documentation language, the secondary contact designation, the timeline for Monday's docketing that did not change, only the provenance of the submission. His voice was precise and level throughout, occasionally sharp when a detail needed sharpening, once or twice almost persuasive in the way that people are persuasive when they have nothing left to manage with except the actual argument. When he hung up, his face had the specific quality of a man who has just finished something that took everything he had. It's workable, he said. The timeline is the same. The documentation is modified. My direct exposure as submission source is... Tell me tomorrow, she said. He looked at her. You have cracked ribs, and you've been awake for how long? Since Friday morning, largely. Then the documentation details can wait until you've slept. She stood, began clearing the first aid materials from the table, moving with the practical economy of someone returning to the domestic after the extreme, because that was what you did. You came back to the ordinary. You re-established its parameters. You made it real again by touching it. The couch folds out. It's not comfortable. Sienna, you are not driving anywhere with cracked ribs and 40-plus hours without sleep. That is not a romantic invitation. That is a medical assessment from a licensed nurse. She put the kit back under the sink. The drawer in the bathroom has a spare toothbrush. He stood, slowly, careful of the right side. She watched him locate the threshold of pain and work within it, the specific adjustment that becomes habit when something hurts and you decide to function regardless. He picked up his jacket from the chair behind him, looked at the torn shoulder seam. "It's a good jacket," he said. Was. Something moved in his expression. Not the ghost of the laugh. The actual one, brief and real and exhausted. "Yeah, was." She got the couch set up while he was in the bathroom. Extra pillow from the closet. One, because the closet had one extra, and that was the accurate number. Blanket that Maisie had exiled from her own bed because she found it too heavy, and which was, therefore, extremely warm. She straightened the sheet, stood back. It was a couch. It was not comfortable. It was 12 feet from where her daughter was sleeping and 7 feet from her own bedroom door, and that specific geometry had its own weight, its own accumulated meaning, which she was not going to examine tonight. He came out of the bathroom, looked at the couch. "I've slept in worse places," he said. "I believe you." She turned off the overhead light. The apartment settled into its nighttime arrangement, the hallway nightlight, the low glow from the street through the curtains, the particular quality of a space at rest. She was almost to her bedroom door. "Sienna." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the couch. For—" He stopped, started over. "You didn't have to make the call. To come to the hotel. To be the person who thought of the chain of custody modification when I was too close to it to see it clearly." A pause. "You keep doing things you don't have to do." She stood at her bedroom door with her hand on the frame. The nightlight from Maisie's room threw a thin orange line across the hallway floor. "I keep doing things I choose to do," she said. "There's a difference." He was quiet. "Sleep," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be long." She went to bed, left the lamp off. The apartment held her in its familiar dimensions, and she lay in the dark and listened to the specific quality of silence that comes from a space that has more people in it than usual. Not loud, just different, the distributed presence of other breathing in nearby rooms. She was asleep before she'd finished noting it. At 6:19, Maisie appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, with her hair in the condition it always reached by morning, a state of organized chaos that Sienna had stopped trying to fully understand, and padded toward the kitchen. She stopped at the entrance to the living room, looked at the man asleep on the couch, looked at her mother's bedroom door, came to a 6-year-old's rapid assessment of the situation, went to the kitchen. Sienna heard the cereal cabinet open, heard the specific sound of the Star's cereal box being negotiated out of the cabinet by someone whose arms were not quite long enough, but whose determination made up the deficit. She lay still and let Maisie manage it. At 6:32, Declan woke up. Sienna heard it, the shift of someone becoming conscious, the brief disorientation, the settling. She did not move. She lay in her bed with her eyes open and listened to what happened next. Silence for a moment. Then Maisie's voice. "Hi." Declan's voice, rough from sleep and from everything the preceding 12 hours had involved. "Hi. Your face is more than before." "Yeah, it got some additional help. Does it hurt?" "Some." A pause during which Maisie was audibly processing. "My mom fixed it, though. The new parts." "She did." "She's very good." Another pause, the evaluative kind. "Do you want cereal?" "I would like cereal very much. Stars or squares?" "Stars, obviously." The sound of a second bowl being retrieved. The cereal box again. Maisie's small specific sounds of pouring and arranging. Then two people eating in the particular comfortable silence of people who have established, through previous interaction, that silence between them is acceptable. Sienna did not move for 4 full minutes. Then she got up, went to the bathroom, washed her face with cold water and pressed her wet hands against her cheeks, and held them there for 10 seconds. Looked at herself in the bathroom mirror in the honest way she tried to look at things she needed to be accurate about. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had slept 4 hours after a significant crisis and was about to re-engage with the world anyway, which was true. She also looked like something else, something she didn't have a precise word for. Not happy exactly, because happy was too simple for something that also contained cracked ribs and federal filings and 7 years of loss. Something more accurate than happy. Something that had to do with the specific sensation of being in the right place, even when the right place was complicated. She went to the kitchen. Maisie was explaining the 6 times table. Declan was nodding with the same focused attention he applied to federal negotiations, which Maisie seemed to find appropriate and expected. 7 times 6 is harder than 6 times 7, Maisie said. Is it a different answer? Maisie looked at him. No, it's the same answer. Then maybe it's the same difficulty. Maisie considered this. It feels harder. A lot of things feel harder going one direction than the other, Declan said. That doesn't mean they are. Maisie ate a spoonful of stars and thought about this with the gravity of someone receiving information that applies to more than the immediate subject. Okay, she said, but I'm still going to practice it more. That's the right call. Sienna poured coffee, set a cup in front of Declan without asking. He looked at it the way he'd looked at the tea the first night, with slight surprise, as though the ordinary act of someone handing him something warm was an input his system registered as notable. She sat down with her own cup. The filing docket's at 9 a.m., he said quietly. Maisie was fully absorbed in her cereal. Carver's office confirmed 40 minutes ago. Once it's docketed, I know. Hale's calculus flips. Acting against either of us after that point increases his federal exposure significantly rather than reducing it. His attorneys will have advised him of the window. He turned his cup in his hands. The window closes in. He looked at the clock on the microwave. 2 hours and 19 minutes. 2 hours and 19 minutes, Sienna said. Yes. She drank her coffee. Looked at Maisie, who had moved from the 6 times table to a detailed account of the hamster situation involving the girl named Petra, which had developed additional chapters overnight. Maisie told the story with the narrative investment of someone who understood that details mattered and context was everything. 2 hours and 19 minutes. She had spent 7 years surviving by not waiting for things to resolve before she moved forward. She had made every decision in the absence of certainty, in the absence of the right person, in the absence of the resources she'd needed and hadn't had. She had raised a daughter and built a career and paid rent late, and paid it on time and lost sleep and kept going. And the machinery of her life had continued running because she had kept her hands on it every day, regardless of what it cost. She was not going to spend the next 2 hours and 19 minutes waiting in a different way than she'd spent the previous 7 years. She topped off Declan's coffee, sat back down. When this is over, she said, and I mean properly over, the filing, the proceedings, everything settled down to something manageable, I need you to understand what moving forward actually looks like, not the idea of it. He looked at her. Tell me. It looks ordinary. It looks like this kitchen. It looks like helping with the 6 times table and knowing which cereal is the right cereal and learning how the library book system works and being somewhere I can reach you when I need to reach you. She held his gaze. It doesn't look like what the last 8 years looked like. It doesn't look like bodyguards and hotel rooms and parking structures. I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for honest and present and ordinary. Yes, he said. Immediately, without consideration, because it was not something that required consideration. And Maisie, she gets to set the pace, he said. Entirely. Whatever she needs, in whatever order she needs it, on whatever timeline she determines. I don't push. I don't press. I show up, and I let her decide. Sienna looked at him across the table. At the bruised jaw and the cracked ribs and the gauze-wrapped knuckles and the man underneath all of it, the one she'd recognized in a hospital hallway by the jaw and the stillness of his eyes. Okay, she said. Yeah, he said. Maisie looked between them. Arrived at the assessment that the adult conversation had reached a resolution satisfactory to both parties, held up her empty bowl. More stars, she said. Sienna got the box. Poured. Declan held out his bowl too without asking, the specific gesture of someone who has identified the correct behavior in a system and applied it. Maisie looked at his outstretched bowl, looked at her mother, made the small nod of someone approving a procedural choice. She poured his cereal too. At 9:04 a.m., Declan's phone vibrated against the kitchen table. He looked at it, a single text from his attorney. He turned the phone so Sienna could see the screen. Filed, confirmed. Docketed 9:02 a.m. Hale's attorneys have been notified per standard process. She read it twice. The window was closed. She set her coffee cup down on the table with the specific care of someone placing something that might be fragile. Maisie was in the living room now, post-breakfast, constructing something from the large cardboard blocks she kept in the corner. The sounds of construction, the specific impacts and adjustments of a 6-year-old engineering project, came through the doorway with the cheerful purposefulness of someone who had a plan and was executing it. "It's done," Sienna said. "The immediate part," Declan said. "The process takes—" "I know what the process takes. I'm talking about the immediate part." He exhaled slowly, the shallow breath of the cracked ribs, careful, controlled. "Yes, the immediate part is done." She looked at the kitchen, at the 2 coffee cups and the cereal bowls and the phone on the table and the morning light coming through the window at its November angle, flat and honest, making no claims about the day being anything other than what it was. Then she stood up, picked up her phone, dialed a number she'd had for 12 years. "Dominique," she said when it answered, "I need to trade my shift today. I know it's short notice. I have—" She paused. "I have something that requires my presence." "Yes. I'll cover your Thursday. Both of them. Thank you." She hung up. Declan was watching her. "You're staying," he said. "I'm staying." She picked up the coffee cups and took them to the sink. "You need to go to an urgent care for imaging on those ribs. I'm coming with you. Maisie." She looked through the doorway at the block construction, which had grown to an ambitious height. "Maisie can come too. She's good at waiting rooms. She brings things to do." A pause during which Declan's face did something she'd learned to wait for. The movement below the surface that reached his expression only when he'd stopped trying to manage it. "Okay," he said. "Get your jacket," she said. "The torn shoulder is—" "I know. I have a needle and thread." He looked at her. "You're going to sew my jacket." "I'm going to sew the seam that you can't reach with one functional arm. Sit still for 5 minutes." She got the sewing kit from the bathroom cabinet. He sat at the kitchen table with his jacket in his lap and held the torn seam together while she worked. The stitches were not beautiful. She was a nurse, not a seamstress. But they were tight and even and would hold, which was the operative standard. Maisie appeared in the kitchen doorway. "What are you doing?" she said. "Fixing his jacket," Sienna said. Maisie observed this for a moment. "The shoulder part." "Yes." "It ripped because someone grabbed it." Maisie said this with the matter-of-fact tone she applied to all direct assessments. Not a question. Sienna tied off the thread, snipped it. "We're going to get some pictures taken of Declan's ribs. You're coming. Bring your book and something to draw." "The horse book?" "Whatever you want." Maisie disappeared back into the living room to locate these items, her departure as efficient as her arrival. Sienna smoothed the mended seam with her thumb. It held. She handed the jacket back. He took it, looked at the seam, looked at her. "Thank you," he said. For the 3rd time since arriving, each time meaning a different and increasingly specific thing. "You already thanked me," she said. "I have a lot of ground to cover." She almost told him he didn't have to, stopped herself. Recognized that what he needed was to be allowed to cover it, not absolved of the distance, not told it didn't matter, but permitted to close it in the specific way that required showing up and staying and doing the ordinary things consistently over ordinary time. "You can start," she said, by carrying Maisie's backpack. She'll want her hands free. "For what?" She gestures when she talks. "You've seen it." "I have." He put on the jacket. It sat right at the shoulder now, the mended seam flush against the fabric. "I'll carry the backpack." They left the apartment at 9:51. Declan held the lobby door. Maisie walked through first, already talking about the hamster situation in a new chapter that had developed during the block construction, and Declan fell into step beside her with the specific adjustment of someone calibrating to a shorter stride, which he did without thinking about it, which was itself a thing Sienna noted and filed. The morning was cold. November in Chicago, not asking permission, not apologizing for itself. The sky was the flat pewter color of the 2nd week of November, when winter has made its decision, but not yet fully committed. Sienna walked on Maisie's other side. The 3 of them moved down the sidewalk together, the small person between the 2 adults, talking about a hamster, gesturing, the backpack on Declan's shoulder, the cracked ribs held carefully, the mended jacket at the shoulder, the morning honest and cold around them. ordinary. Entirely, specifically, deliberately ordinary. The proceedings that followed were not quick, and they did not lack for difficulty. The federal process moved at the pace of federal processes, measured, methodical, producing documentation that accumulated in Declan's attorney's office in folders that Sienna never looked at directly, but whose existence she was aware of the way you're aware of weather systems moving in the distance. Declan testified in December, twice, and the days of his testimony were days. Sienna worked her shifts and came home and made dinner and texted him brief, concrete things. Maisie found her library book. The check engine light went off for 3 days and then came back. Mrs. Kowalski said to say hello. He responded to all of them. Everyone. Garrett Hale entered into a cooperation agreement in January that his attorney described as pragmatic and the U.S. attorney described as in the interest of the public, and that Sienna read about in a 4-paragraph Tribune summary over coffee on a Tuesday morning and described to no one as sufficient, because sufficient was the accurate word. Not justice in the complete sense. There was no complete sense, she understood that now, because the damage that had been done to 7 years of her life, and to Declan's and to Maisie's without Maisie knowing it had been done. None of that was repaired by a cooperation agreement. It was only acknowledged. An acknowledgement, she'd decided, was its own kind of closing. The conversation about paternity happened in January, not deliberately. She had not planned the occasion, and she suspected Declan had not either, which was how she'd known it was the right moment, because the right moments for the hard things are almost never the planned ones. Maisie had a family tree worksheet for school. She brought it to the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening and worked on it with the methodical seriousness she applied to important documents. And she got to the section labeled Father and sat with her pencil for a moment and then looked at Declan, who was at the table with his own coffee, and said, "Are you my dad?" The kitchen was very quiet. Declan looked at Sienna. Sienna gave him the small nod he'd been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it. "Yes," he said, "if you want to know that." Maisie looked at the worksheet, at Declan, at the worksheet again. She turned her pencil over once, the eraser end tapping the table twice in the specific rhythm she used when she was processing something significant. "I figured," she said, "you have my eyes." She wrote his name in the father column in her careful, blocky handwriting, continued the worksheet. Declan looked at Sienna across the table with an expression she could not have described to anyone and that she did not try to, because some things belong only in the room where they happen. "Anyone want hot chocolate?" she said. "Yes," Maisie said immediately. "Yes," Declan said, looking at Sienna. "Thank you." The legal acknowledgement of paternity was filed in February. A clean document signed at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning before her shift, witnessed by Patricia, who brought pastries and asked no questions and cried in the car outside on the way home, which she told Sienna about 2 weeks later as though reporting on something that had happened to someone else. Declan's penalties were finalized in March. Financial, documented, dischargeable. He served no time. He had cooperated fully. His attorney called the outcome remarkable, and Declan called it the beginning of being a person he could defend having been, which was different from remarkable and more accurate. He kept his own apartment through spring. Neither of them mentioned it. Maisie mentioned it in April with the directness she'd inherited from both sides of her parentage and sharpened through 6 years of living primarily among adults. "When are you going to live here?" she said to Declan over dinner one Thursday. "That's your mother's decision," he said. Maisie looked at Sienna. Sienna put her fork down, looked at her daughter, at the dark eyes that were going to ask the question regardless of whether she was ready for it, at the man across the table who had learned over the course of the winter and the spring which cereal was correct and how the library book system worked and where the fuse box was, and that Maisie needed quiet on Tuesday afternoons and noise on Fridays, and that the radiator knocked twice before it settled and was never actually a problem. "I think," Sienna said, "that he should come live here." Maisie nodded. "Okay. He can have the drawer in the bathroom, not the big one." "The big one is yours," Declan said, "obviously. And you have to learn the recycling system. Mom keeps forgetting which bin is which." "I don't forget," Sienna said. "I make considered choices." "That's what forgetting looks like when a grown-up does it," Maisie said, and ate her pasta with the satisfaction of someone who has resolved a significant logistical matter and is now free to focus on dinner. He moved in on a Saturday in November. 1 year and 12 days after the hospital hallway. 2 boxes, which told its own story about what he'd chosen to carry forward from the life he'd spent 8 years in and 2 years dismantling. His books went on the lower shelf because the upper shelf was Maisie's. His coffee went above the kettle. His coat went on the hook that had been empty for 6 years, since Sienna had put it there against the possibility of a guest that almost never materialized. At the end of the moving day, Maisie inspected the arrangements with the authority of someone conducting an official review. She approved the book placement. She found the bathroom drawer situation adequate. She noted that his shoes were very large and this was going to require coordination in the entryway. "Coordination," Declan said gravely. "Noted. Mom's shoes go on the left. Mine go in the middle. You can have the right. The right is sufficient." "Good." She looked at him. At Sienna. At the apartment that was now, in some material and legal and daily habitual sense, the apartment of all 3 of them. "Can we have the star cereal for dinner?" "No," Sienna said. "Can we have it after dinner?" "That's not how cereal works." "It could be. It won't be." Maisie accepted this with the philosophical resignation of someone who had raised the argument and noted the result for future reference. She went to the living room. The sounds of something being reorganized emerged shortly thereafter. Her block construction, relocated to accommodate the revised furniture arrangement, rebuilt with the same ambitious structural ambitions as before. Declan sat at the kitchen table. Sienna sat across from him. The apartment held them in its specific, familiar dimensions. The radiator that was going to knock in approximately 20 minutes, the amber of the streetlights beginning to come in through the windows as the November evening settled over the city, the thin orange line of Maisie's nightlight already showing under her bedroom door, even though she wasn't in there yet because she was in the living room building something. 2 coffee cups on the table, cold, because neither of them had gotten around to drinking them hot. 7 years of distance resolved into the specific, ordinary fact of being in the same room on a Saturday evening with nothing requiring urgent action. Declan looked at his hands on the table. The knuckles, healed now. Not perfectly, never perfectly. The scar tissue a slightly different texture than the surrounding skin. The kind of record the body keeps regardless of whether you want one. He looked at them the way she'd sometimes seen him look at things he was taking inventory of. Accurately. Without flinching from the accuracy. "I owe you about 6 years of ordinary Saturdays," he said. "You can't pay that back." "No." "So stop trying to calculate it and start just being here." She picked up her cold coffee and drank it because that was the kind of evening it was, the kind where cold coffee was fine and hot coffee was what you'd planned for, and this was better than planned. "That's what ordinary looks like. You're just here. It doesn't require accounting." He looked at her. "I don't know how to do that," he said. "I'm aware of that. I've been doing high stakes for 8 years, and ordinary is—" He stopped. "It's harder than I expected." "I know. Is that something you can work with?" She thought about all the things that question contained. The cracked ribs and the hotel room and the parking structure and the chain of custody modification and the Tuesday texts about library books and the cereal and the shoulder seam she'd sewn back together in a kitchen at 3 a.m. The 7 years she'd spent doing everything alone and the specific quality of the last 14 months in which she hadn't been entirely alone, in which the alone had been shifting incrementally towards something else through the daily specific ordinary work of 2 people deciding, one Tuesday at a time, to keep showing up. "Yes," she said, "that's something I can work with." From the living room, Maisie's construction reached some critical structural point and made a sound of either tremendous achievement or catastrophic collapse. It was impossible to tell from the kitchen which, and a moment later Maisie appeared in the doorway looking satisfied rather than distressed, which resolved the question. "I need help with the tall part," she said, to both of them equally. The way she said things that were for both of them, with the natural authority of a child who has decided that both was the correct category and doesn't require discussion. Declan looked at Sienna. Sienna looked at Declan. They both stood up. They went to help with the tall part. The blocks were large and awkward and required coordination that none of the 3 of them had established yet. The specific physical language of people who are still learning how to work together in a shared space, still finding the rhythm, still occasionally reaching for the same block or getting in each other's way. Maisie directed. Declan followed instructions. Sienna held the structure steady while the tall part was added, because the tall part had ambitions that exceeded the base's current stability, and the base needed an anchor. The construction stood. Maisie stepped back, assessed it with crossed arms and the evaluating eye of someone who has had a vision and is determining whether the executed reality matches. "Good," she said. "It's good." Outside, Chicago November pressed cold against the windows. The radiator knocked, twice, its warning, and went still, doing the thing it always did. The thing it had always done in this apartment. The reliable small complaint of a building that had been standing longer than any of them and would be standing after them and was not asking for anything, only noting that the season had changed. The nightlight was on in Maisie's room. The streetlights were amber through the curtains. The coffee on the kitchen table had gone entirely cold, which was fine, which was how it usually went, which was the accurate description of most ordinary evenings. Not what you planned, and better. Maisie put her hands on her hips and looked at the construction. "Tomorrow we make it bigger," she said. "Bigger how?" Declan said. "Much bigger." She turned and went toward the bathroom with the purposefulness of someone transitioning to the next phase of the evening. "I'm going to brush my teeth now. Then I want the story. The horse one. Chapter 7. "I'll do Chapter 7, Sienna said. "He can do some of it." Maisie pointed at Declan without looking back. "He does different voices." She disappeared into the bathroom. Sienna looked at Declan. He looked at Sienna. "Different voices," she said. "I may have agreed to do different voices at some point," he said, and committed before understanding the scope. "Welcome to parenting." He was quiet for a moment, with the expression she'd seen on him once before. In the hotel room at 2:30 a.m., when the call to Carver had been finished, and the adrenaline had receded, and what remained was something genuine and unguarded below the surface of all the competence. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She went to put the kettle on. The apartment was warm. The construction stood in the living room at an ambitious height. The radiator had settled into its evening quiet. Maisie was brushing her teeth with the mechanical thoroughness of someone who has opinions about the 2-minute rule. Chapter 7 of the Horse Book was waiting on the nightstand. This was the life. Not perfect. Not smooth. Not what either of them had planned at 22 on the days when everything had seemed possible and the future had been an abstraction they could project anything onto. Something better than planned. Something earned in the specific, costly way that things worth having require being earned. Not through suffering as a transaction, but through the daily accumulated choice to be honest and present and ordinary in a world that made ordinary difficult and made it worth fighting for anyway. Sienna turned on the kettle, listened to it begin. Behind her, from Maisie's room, the sound of a 6-year-old deciding where everyone needed to sit for Chapter 7. Organizing them. Making room. The way people do when they've decided that the space around them is large enough for everyone who belongs in it.